Hey guys, we'll get started because we have a tight schedule today, like 4 1-hour conversations. So there's a little bit of a change in, just a little minor shift. Where yesterday we found this video, it's a long 2-hour video of Egger being interviewed, and some students excerpted out anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes that are of Egger's own words, talking about the 4 topics that we're discussing today. And so we're going to start each session. I'm getting blinded here. Okay. We're going to start each section with one of these outtakes. They're not individual, so like we're not going to be able to start on 0 right when it's relevant. We're going to sort of ease into it. And then hit pause. And so our aim for these sessions is not for any of us to be making presentations and lecturing at you and being academic. It's to prompt you guys to have reflections, to talk around the subject in kind of almost any way you want. We have the audience seated with some people who, if we get lulls or somebody can step in with unique knowledge, can jump in, but ideally you guys are the discussants, not necessarily a set panel of people. We have also some current students, so I think that's sort of nice that we can also get contemporary sort of reflection on some of these questions. Yeah, I see you guys getting all nervous, but so let me try to manage the room and the projection system, and we'll hear from Egger, and then we'll pause that. And I have no idea. I have no idea what he has to say. So I'm hoping that what he gives us is something that can start us off scrutinizing something about representation, drawing, and everything.
We can always open his book.
That too. We have his book, and we do.
The
The work on the walls. I'll raise the projector after the video is done. So we do have some drawings and some work that represents kind of an arc of Egger's contribution to different forms of representation in the room. So let's try this.
The students really helped, and everybody sketched. In fact, the first day we started to sketch, and I really enjoyed, the weather was so good that in the middle of the lab, the guys would come and go, it's really beautiful outside. We should go outside and sketch. Okay, forget the lab. So that's what we did. And I think their drawings got better, but not because they were taught to sketch. And don't forget, when Ferrari first came here, there was a drawing class, there was a history class, and the history class was really not very bad. It was just chaos. Because this old faculty we had, Wiss, had thousands of slides, and they were beautiful slides. And that's what he did, he just showed those slides. So we slowly we eliminated the drawing course, Ferrari did, and he did it in the most subversive way. He would talk the students into rebelling. He was very good at that. And then the history class slowly, and I don't think we've solved it yet, but we're trying to go to history of ideas rather than history of products. And I think we're now just examples of, and then what the architect intended to do, and the hotshot try to catch the newest wave of hotshot architects. Whereas before, history of ideas would also be, you could see the same ideas in painting, in industrial design, in fashion design, in architecture. They were parallel. And that was more critical than the products they were making at that moment. So that educational, probably, you have to be careful that, we were accused, we invited the new dean at UNCC up, who was one of the old teachers at Auburn, and he sat and listened to us one evening, At the end, I think it was after a few too many drinks, he just said, "You guys are not teaching architecture at all." We said, "Thank you." We were teaching thinking. We thought, which we weren't, but we thought we were. And I think the strength of the iterative, allowing a student to iteratively go back into their own work on their own rather than because of some critique is fundamental, and that is very hard to instill in anybody. Ferrari always said, if you want to be a famous painter, you have to make a painting every day for the rest of your life. And of course, after the third day, you've run out of ideas, right? You run out of gas. So that staying the course to remake something over and over and over. And it's not a polishing question. It's make the thing lose its noise. That is the most difficult because of the time. So we've gotten a little too efficient, I think, at the moment. But the tuition is now 4 times what it was, or 5 times. Unbelievable pressure to hit the ground running with CAD. And we talked about not ever teaching drawing, not ever teaching photography, not ever teaching the computer. Well, that's silly because we did teach drawing and we did teach computer and we did teach photography. But it was with photography, not with 3 credits or 4 credits.
I would like to add one little thing that I was just reminded as I was listening to the conversation. I've been teaching for 17 years or so, and Gene was around, and I would invite him every so often to come to our reviews because it was just wonderful to watch him go through the work and talking about the work. And I remember one time he said, a student had an elevation, some trees, and he's like, when you want to represent this, you don't draw the tree, you draw the space between the leaves. And we were like,
Of course you draw the space between.
you're drawing light, so it's like the sketching is a way of seeing what you know and seeing anew, right? The possibility of learning how to see in new ways. So yeah, that just came back.
Well, I want, somebody mentioned diagram a little while ago, and I'd say probably defer to the sketch because we associate Egger so much with the sketch. But I'd say that something about this, I call it sometimes X-ray vision, the analytic layers of kind of, like really a sketch isn't what you can see with your eye. It's what you see with your mind. And so again, like we have on the wall, I was hanging these, so I was kind of paying more attention. I only saw them for the first time last Tuesday. They're from 1982, this exhibition that's on the wall. And we'll talk about it in terms of its content in the 4th session. But if you look at some of the analytic drawings that are there that are more constructed drawings, but they're no less kind of a diagramming a way of understanding, that is paralleled in the sketch, but through different means. So, I mean, I find that in a way, we're sort of always doing the same thing, filtering, distilling, finding the essential of something in particular that resonates with the brain and eyes of the person who's doing the studying. But I think it's like you have so much volition that it's not neutral at all. And teaching photography, of course, you guys, photography has always been pretty important. Somebody was in here yesterday and they said, wow, we spent a lot of time in the darkroom. Yeah. And so, that's another kind of filter, another kind of distillation. And so I just wanted to expand a little bit more to some of the different practices and ways of seeing that you guys and we've been engaged in over all these years. And those means of working reveal different attributes about the thing you're studying.
Hey, I'm a practitioner right now. If I may offer a friendly amendment. The gentleman said if you're still doing that, whatever the technique is, I'd push back on the word still. My practice has evolved to include working with old buildings, timber frames. This is the way people built. And because of that, I recognize a certain desire of late for the concept of craft in everything, not just in architecture, in food, in spirits, in beer. We've seen that over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Everything's getting better. People want more quality. Being able to draw by hand is a tool. So because I've gone down a rabbit hole of working with older things, I have learned techniques I didn't know about from 150 years ago. I have seen the tools that make those things 150 years ago. They dismiss myths about those things when you look at the old tools. Look at a framing square. It's designed to build a timber frame. It's not designed to build a 2x4 building. That's what it's for, if you know how to read it. So I recommend to you to put as many tools in your toolbox as you can, because you do not know when you'll need them. When a contractor comes onto one of my sites and he tells me how he's going to take apart one of my old buildings, the way he tells me he's qualified or not.
Amen, brother.
Because I know how it went together. And you can't take it apart that way or you'll destroy it, even though it will come apart. You don't know that because you don't know the craft. So I encourage you, learn as many of them as you can. With all your friends.
Amendment accepted. And endorsed.
Your name is on this board.
I printed all these.
Okay.
I saw them in 1982 for the first time before anyone else. They were in a tray of chemicals.
Well, I mean, I believe someone told me, I haven't seen the list of participants, but I was told that three people who were listed as the authors of this work are going to be here. So it would be wonderful, because we also have student work on the sidewalls, that the students from 1982 and the students from 2024 might actually be able to have a nice little conversation in the fourth session.
I have a story that kind of puts together some beautiful things that have been spoken about. And one of them is how you transmit, if you will, what you're working with in an office to a potential client. You know, are they seeing what you're seeing? And I think this idea about having multiple modes of inquiry, multiple modes of representation, multiple modes to show yourself also is not just usable, but more than just reasonable when you show your work to others. And where I hit, a wall with that was leaving grad school, practicing in New York, nice firm, a lot of scales of work. First job I got was a penthouse apartment, punch two, put them together to make one. Two Citicorp bank lawyers, very intelligent, built other things before. It was my first job. Everything was going well. And picked out this green stone, went to the marble yard, wet brush to get it wet. This makes sense to tell this part of the story. Took the client to see the marble. This is the one you're going to select. Typical, that's not unusual. So then it's all done and we walk in. I'm very nervous. It's the first little job I had. And she walks in and she goes, "Oh, I didn't know it was going to be green like that." And I go, "Okay, everything went through my head. I'm fired. It's the end. It's over. It's a nightmare." And 100 things went through my head. And then she said, "I love it." And what did she see? I thought she saw what I saw, but she didn't. So it worked out okay. But here's the story. How do you interfere and, how do you communicate things and read what you need to show? All the arsenal of things that you have to be able to show yourself are also transmittable to others. So you need all those grounds. You need all those things. This story worked out, but it really gave me pause to think there was a disconnect, and how do you know? How do you know if they're seeing what you're showing?
Yeah.
So the more you can do for yourself, the more you can put forward to someone else that you're working with. It's really important. It's really important.
Well, to me, I think, I want to hear from people who've practiced more, but the nature of analogy, I think, is really important because, students come from really diverse, maybe less diverse backgrounds. I don't know, different kinds of diverse backgrounds. We used to get farmers kids who could take apart tractors. We don't get that as much anymore. But maybe there's one in the room, I don't know. But you know, that you actually have to talk to a lot of different people in order to find shared understanding, like in communication. And so I would liken the different forms of representation to sort of different analogical kind of associations we might make in order to kind of make clear how we understand things when we're coming from different points of view.
Well, and as an architect, you have to realize that you're speaking to not only your clients, but you're speaking to the lay people as well on the jobs.
Right.
So your vocabulary and your ability to discuss and get across an idea, that your language is important, you know, and again, like what Julie said, I didn't realize taking all of those, you know, women's studies and language and poetry classes, I had no idea. I did them because I wanted to. What I realize now as a practicing architect is that use of language has allowed me to communicate in my proposal writing and in my ability to communicate with my clients and with the people on the site. And that the client and the site people, they don't speak the same language. I'm British.
My first degree was English, by the way.
Yeah, I'm a practicing architect, but to talk about how the struggles and sometimes of getting people to understand what you're dealing with. One of my big clients is a school for the blind. And, you know, I've had to adjust and I've had to learn new ways to communicate with them. And it affects, you know, the process that I have to go through and to make them understand. And in some cases I actually have to bring in more samples so they can feel it, so they can touch these things than I might ordinarily have to do. But it also, you know, in dealing with a client like that, you have to change the way of, you have to look at things a different way. Which actually is kind of very much mind expanding because we're so visual and they're visual, but in a different way. It's actually kind of interesting because it's like, you know, the skin is the biggest organ in the body. And you have to take care of that. And it's, you know, they may not be able to see, or they may be able to see differently. You know, how does it feel? You know, how does it touch, you know, the sunlight? How does that impact their experience of the building? You know, the sound of the building, you know, that's a tremendous, you know, important in these buildings. You have to be very quiet because otherwise, because they're having to pick up those audible clues in where they are and how big the space is and where they are in the space. It's a, you know, it's a direction finding thing.
Can I ask a question that students always ask when they have sound being critically important in their design idea, their concept? How do you guys draw the sound of architecture?
It's much more, it's I guess you'd say, it's really more, you're drawing it in 3 dimensions. Okay, you have to, in some cases, you have to actually take them physically to a space and say, this is the difference. Okay, you're in this space, you're in this space. You can feel the difference between those spaces. You're not putting something down on paper.
Well, but if a student's not making yet, right? They're like thinking of this haptic experience that they want someone to have. And it's always a little bit of a grappling thing. Like, how does one design using the tools we have? I mean, of course, you could say, I'm going to make a video or something like that, but I'm really interested in how you might draw it.
Sounds like you're saying volume, that it really, it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it's.
And modeling, of course, is probably an excellent thing
Yeah, it
to
is.
think about because you can feel it, but.
Yeah, you can start to, it's very tactile.
So, but you have a range of those, so one as opposed to another. So
Right.
it's not a unit that's repeated. So here's a kind of content, here's a kind of envelope, here's another envelope. So it sounds like it's volume.
I would add, this is one of the things that I learned here. That even the smallest decision about your presentation, whether it's the orientation of a view, whether it's your line weights, it's all those tools, a little bit of color. All of those things if you use them very carefully, you can communicate.
precision.
With precision, you can communicate those ideas so much more effectively to clients. But you have to take the time and the patience to craft a board or a photo or a 3D illustration or whatever it is you're doing. You have to think about what you're presenting very carefully. Because once you present it, you either get it right or you don't. And so if you want your clients to buy into what you're trying to communicate to them, taking the time to do it right and think about those things is so important.
Mark alluded it to it though, but think about what if you, sometimes I think in the effort to want to not know what's right, you're almost non-committal. And I think the hardest thing right now is to be committed, to actually make a commitment towards a position, which means then I have something I'm trying to say. And therefore, that actually makes it much easier to design, right? Because I have set now for myself some limits. But there's a big non-committedness that we see these days, maybe always. You guys can
It's
reflect.
too easy to change things with the computers.
Yeah, that could be it too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, I can come up with 5 schemes in
Yeah.
2 hours. And so that once you commit to the computer, and that's the problem. Because then you have 5, overload your client.
Camden, you raised your
I
hand.
just want to kind of bring it back to what Gene was talking about.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
get a
go
little
back to Gene. I love
frustrated.
him.
that I see students over here who probably got a deadline sometime in the upcoming few days and be worried about that. And I'm starting to hear this kind of wah, wah, wah about, I'm a practitioner and one of the wonderful things Gene said was, if you want to be a painter, you got to do a painting every day. And this is not about those tree drawings I did, but it's just about the sort of the persistence that you want to have. And one, you're not going to persist in something you don't love. So make sure you find what you love and what intersects with architecture. But I think he said, you've done 3 of them. You do 3 paintings and you're empty, your gas tank is empty. And that is the best place to be as a designer, as an architect, is because it's like when I did the tree drawings, about the 10th one, I'd drawn every way that I knew how to draw, right? And I came in as an art major, but so, and after that 10th one, it was kind of like, as my 2.5-year grandson does when I ask him a question that he doesn't know the answer to, he goes, And it's when you get to that place that you don't know, because that's where we want to be as architects. We want to be in a position to find something out we don't know. So I think that's where, as I work at my desk, and I would tell my students, I have to stay up all night, at least one night with my project. And it's not about getting the work done. It's about letting my idea wear me down, right? Because you go in saying, idea, you're going to do that. You're going to be this, and you're going to do this. And about 3 a.m, your eyes are starting to cross and your fingers hurt. And you finally get in a position where you say, okay, idea, tell me what to do. Don't do it. Just tell me what to do. And you start listening. And that's that place you want to be. The same as when you run out of ways to draw that tree, you start asking the tree. And I think that's so incredible. It's so incredible to be there. And I think as practitioners, we have to preserve that. We have to be in that same place. We have to put ourselves in that place as practitioners so that it's not about, do I use a computer or it's about, how do I start listening to what needs to be done rather than start telling the situation what I want it to do. That's
Camden, do you hear Gene saying like, what's what's the difference between what you're saying and what you're showing? Because that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
this beautiful world that can apply to the student, can apply to the practitioner as they relate to their own work, as they relate their work to the client. All these stories have that thread. And it's not that sometimes they're resolved, sometimes they're differentiated, but that conversation between what you're saying and what you're showing is a continuum.
Yes.
And it moves around and it is always ever important. It is the most important thing. I mean, how many times did you hear him say, I heard him say that. I didn't count, but it would just come up again and again and again. Because it had to be both. Maybe it was this a little bit at the moment and that a little bit at the moment, but it always had to be both. I just hear him saying, I can hear him saying that right now.
I'm gonna stay in because I don't talk that loud. One of the things from the video clip that really struck me is how he said, make the thing lose its noise. Because we always say simplify, edit in our office, but that's kind of, maybe it's the Italian way of saying it for him. But that's something I think is really important in the process at work. As far as conveying ideas to a client, one of the things that happened to me after school and then going into the practice was, you know, you've got the site, you've got the program and your ideas going on in the building, but one of the things I found really successful is, especially looking at all these sketches, and I was one of the study abroad students, is that you're getting out and experiencing other architecture, other sites, other pieces of art. We like to take our clients kind of on a trip along with our process. Like, this is our process, this is your plan, this is your program developing, but also show them other projects that we didn't do, other people do, just to get a conversation going, slideshow, and our studio puts them together. But it's just a nice dialogue between two things. One lets them know we understand them. The other one lets us just try to figure out. There's always a point when you're building when you're starting to draw, it becomes real, and it doesn't look good yet, right? And so this gives them comfort, like, hey, look how this project dealt with site. Look how, you know, this landscape is. And so having something real for them to see along with the sketch has been really a useful tool that I learned I didn't learn here. I learned here, but I didn't know I was learning here necessarily.
One thing I've always thought is a good challenge to have in the practice is to, at the completion of your project, have a project that's worthy of sketching. Because, you know, it's like you always going out there, you're looking for those complexity those spaces with some complexity, those spaces that have some merit. You don't go out to sketch a dollar store necessarily, you know? You know, shouldn't your project be, at the completion of it, have something where, you know, you want to go back out and sketch that thing? Yeah, you want to, because you have it in your mind as you're constructing it, you know, on the drawings or however whatever tools you use to convey that to the contractors so that they can perform their functions and create this three-dimensional object in a space. You know, shouldn't you be at the point at the end of it, want to go back out and sketch it? Say, hey, you know, did it work? Did what my mind, you know, have? Did it actually function in that environment? Did it work the way that you thought it would?
Thinking about my work, our work, and it's like, you know, listen, for the young students, you guys probably don't know about a guy by the name of James Wines. James Wines was an architect in the early 80s that worked with a wholesaler before Amazon came along. It's called Best Products. It's a group that they had their headquarters out of Richmond. And the building is actually still there. I didn't realize it's at Tarm Road at 95 North. I was talking to a colleague a week ago. Laura and I are down in Richmond visiting our daughter at the AA convention, and he said the Best Products headquarters there, which is done by a firm you've probably never heard about, called Hardy Boltzmann Pfeiffer. But the point of this is that James Wines took projects like the dollar stores of those days, the Best Products, and reinvented them. So I want you to look them up, James Wines. And what he did is he took facades and buildings and treated the facades, the front, that Venturi talked about.
Is the firm Shop Architects? I mean,
Site.
Site, that's a
Site.
site,
Site.
site architect.
And I want them to kind of discover it because he took the ordinary and created these kind of iconic buildings that I still remember today. I don't know if any of them are still around, but it was just a take of creativity and thought. He was kind of a sculptor in some ways. But even the most banal building, if like you're saying, make it sketchable. I could sketch those buildings out right now because they're that memorable. And of course, not past facade, but.
You gotta do some eye hopping.
Yeah. There is a typology there.
Yeah.
That's right.
We have like 5 minutes left, and I'm wondering, is there something we haven't touched on, around the question of representation, and whether it's drawing or otherwise? Yeah, I mean, we're just gonna wrap this thing up, right? All of us.
I have a comment.
Okay.
At a fundamental level, until you walk into a cathedral and listen to the music that J.S. Bach wrote for that space, or you walk into a building by Le Corbusier, and you see the light coming through at odd angles, and you're inside of a piece of sculpture. Well, when you have that kind of an awareness that we learn in freshman, sophomore year, that you then start to be able to sketch that place because you now have that spatial time awareness.
I love that observation.
When you
because
design something,
It's really, I see sometimes students sketching from images, like they'll look online and they'll find an image. And I guess at one level, sure, at least you're sketching. But this totality of an experience that can be captured through a sketch.
so I ended up in the world of microelectronics. Yet the parallels between that and a city, they're the same. It's just a matter of scale. Space and timing is everything.
Someone else, I saw a hand.
I just think kind of this
Yeah.
discussion about, sketching and, but, I think it's the way you kind of learn the building, if you're doing remodeling, or it's the way you're learning about what you're designing. And as our clients become more educated and have different tools, it's that skill set that we have to learn and understand the building that keeps us relevant, right? Because client can, look at AI and Google a house and get a house plan in
I
30
think you
seconds.
can get software at Home Depot.
Yeah, so, being able to understand the building and tell them the whys and, why you designed it this way and why this space needs to be this way is gonna keep us relevant going forward. So I think it's a skill set that will.
Well, and maybe it's also just to remind us that, I think Bill said it yesterday, but again, it starts to collapse on itself. Who said what? That when Gene's drawing, he's touching, that town, he's touching that church. He's, eliciting, hierarchical understanding of those things. And so, the sketch actually brings near things that perhaps are far. And that is something, that a digital tool does different things. But I think that this notion of, and I agree with Camden that I don't like the saying that we put the digital against the analog. I actually think hybrid practices are really beautiful. I think the world is probably demanding of that. And so maybe even self-critically thinking about how does one overlap and find intersections between different modes of practices, and that it's up to you to do it. You're not going to be taught these things. Yeah.
So what I couldn't say here, I don't get about every one in that comment, but that what you just said sort of springs to life like a real world, like in the trenches experience. I'm in my conference room, there's a monitor presenting this thing to this clients, and on the left-hand monitor is this three-dimensional rendered thing, looks like it just came out of a Coppola studio. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Wow.
The technology
Wow.
that you have here. On the right-hand monitor is the hand sketch that started it. And the clients are just enamored with this little doodle on the right-hand side. And, so there's 1,000 lessons in that, the skill, the marketing actually of it, the craft of it. So, I don't think it's both and, as they used to say in the, so.
So once you become an architect, you still have to relate to the common people. You can't hear it in the beginning, have to be shown bit by bit to get them up to speed. Bump them up just a little bit every time you meet them.
For me, the key word is practice. You're practicing
Yeah.
for the next one, because I've been fortunate enough to do dozens of projects, but it takes me a year before I like looking at a finished one, so that I'm practicing for the next one. And it's the repetition of practice.
Yeah, it's not a rubber stamp. It's actually well, I'm gonna steal as a segue as we move to the pedagogy discussion next. The spiral, right? I mean, it is, you're somewhat advancing, but you're also making connections with that which preceded and making kind of building a foundation that keeps getting taller and taller and taller each time. So closing words.
Closing words are to get back to your initial thoughts and to tie in what you just said and to try to make sense of practice. I can't do that, but it is true that when you are sketching on site, you are actually activating your hippocampus, which is the center of touch. And so you are, in fact, touching the building. I mean, we like to assume it's a metaphor, but it's just not a metaphor. It's actually what's happening. And that is so fundamentally different as a tool or an extension of our thinking than other tools, right? I mean, they're just fundamentally different. And I think that was a very beautiful opening that you remarked in drawing for June. That when you are representing, in fact, you're doing something different. The computer is exceptional at reading presentation, but to make yourself present, that's why he sketched.
Yeah. So thank you for participating in this session, and we'll start on a second session in 15 minutes. And with hearing from Egger again. Just to recap for people who weren't here in the first session, we're encouraging shared conversation, not a kind of, hierarchical delivery of content that one might be normally thinking being in an audience. That's why we have you facing each other. We're starting each session with an excerpt of Gene Egger speaking around the focus topic of the time. And so I'm gonna, hopefully each time we reconnect and have to reconnect and we had some technical problems. So ignore me and hopefully this works okay. And then ideally, maybe there's something you can start discussion that cycles around what we hear from Gene Egger.
If you enjoy this little clip you see, there's a monitor down in the lobby that has a full interview.
Yes.
Shelley, you appreciate
It's
that?
like I think it's a 2-hour long
It's an
interview.
hour
Yeah, but it's like
Yeah.
a museum. You
We'll run
can
it.
dip in and out. It's
Okay.
always on the move.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
wonderful.
So that these are, I think students identified these
Some of that,
excerpts
yes,
here,
exactly.
so.
But the thing is, I will send and make sure afterwards, everybody that's registered and is here, we have your email.
We can't hear you.
We will send this video out to everybody, like a link to it, okay?
You'll get access.
And you'll
Yeah.
see parts of it downstairs. You've seen it one, seen another one. But I think it's really, knowing Gene as well as I knew him, I think it really captures so much of, it's pretty emotional, but pretty real.
Very real.
Okay, so let's hear from Gene
early
again.
on. But he was a prolific writer, and we always loved to make the joke that when you spoke to Burchard, you normally didn't understand what he was saying, but it was so wonderfully said. You just went away happy. You went away inspired. That his formulations were so complete and inspiring. He was also cheap. So it was very economical. I mean, he hired all of us for nothing. We were all kind of dumb, but enthusiastic in the point. So that intellectual question, we were not intellectuals, but we respected what it meant in an environment, and we thought the practice should have that kind of intellectual base, regardless of their forms or fashion or styles or whatever. So we all embraced some of the same writings. We kind of thought we were embracing a structuralist position on thinking. And so Levi-Strauss and his writings, structural anthropology, who he was kind of a rough practitioner too. All of his anthropologist colleagues put him down because he did bad field work. He took bad notes, but he had great insights and formulations. Alfred North Whitehead with Process of Education, and John Dewey, who I think we didn't understand very much. But those process philosophers of things becoming something was where we thought schools had to get back to the architect and how you train the architect rather than make the architecture. And of course, it's not divorced from that, but that focus is easily misunderstood because, you know, the process question that a normal young student was that it's endless, that you know, how do you end this thing? And we always made the quirky formulation that you end your process when you have an idea, and then it starts over. So we started a lot of things that are easily misunderstood if they're superficially applied. Process has a beginning and an end. There's no question about it. And the immature position is that it's just endless, and it's not endless. As an architect, it's endless, but as a maker of things, there's a cycle of closure. And that's one of the hardest things to get across when you're pushing process rather than philosophies of being, idealistic philosophies of being.
So in your educational experience here, and sorry, I forgot your name. Patty. Well, you spoke to it beautifully about the path being open, and that you were allowed to find these other disciplines that kind of supported, and I'll put your intellectual position as an architect, right? And so, what is your feelings now as practitioners? And having I think the beauty of what we're doing today gives you a chance to reflect, right? And I'm enjoying how much all of you seem to really cherish what it is you found here. So, what is your feeling about that? As you see education kind of moving from this educational idea to a more professional idea in architectural education.
So, go ahead.
Yeah.
So a few years back, I had lunch with Jack Davis when he was dean. I don't see him in the seat.
I think, yeah, he wasn't going to be.
Okay. And we were walking across campus, beautiful day. And he said, what was the most valuable thing you learned while you're in COVID? I said, oh, Jack, that's easy. I said, it's like my high school algebra. It's something I use every day.
Yeah.
It's how to think and how to solve problems.
Right.
Everything else, I mean, that's what I was talking about today last night, and I was recalling this morning. I can remember vividly the very first day of architecture school. It was a beautiful Wednesday morning. We were down in the far corner over there on first floor. Bob walks in with two boxes. A box of computer cards in one hand and piano wire in the other. Make me something architectural out of computer cards and wire. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what have I done? And I was like, but it was that whole, and I've had parents ask me that their son or daughter was going to go to architecture school. What do you recommend they take in high school? I said, take art classes. Do not take mechanical drawing. Please, dear God, don't do it. I did. And I had to get out of that method. And somebody said earlier about the memorization thinking. And I wasn't real good at that either. So just getting out of that box, if you will, of being tied to the T-square and a drawing board and relearning how to think and solve problems. That's what like I said, I do construction administration for a living now, and that's what I use every day. And learning how to communicate. Somebody mentioned it. I remember we had a professor come in, Ventry, and he was doing building systems. And he and I got into an argument about lumens and luminaires. And I explained to him in a tactful way, that if you explain to the electrician that he needs to replace the lumen and the luminaire, he's going to look at you like you got three heads. To him, it's a light bulb and a light fixture. Right. That didn't go over well with him. It's like what somebody said last night. That's not going to work real well.
That was Egger. That's not gonna work.
That's not going to work. Yeah.
It's not gonna work.
He did not like me much after that. So, but that's what I learned here was, and it's nice to see that a lot hasn't changed as you walk through the studios. When I walked in the front door yesterday, I was like, oh my God, it's still here.
I think the beauty of the first year program in particular was, again, there was an emphasis on deconstructing your language so that, you know, we walk in with the perception of what a door is, what a window is, right? And Gene was a master, because I was very blessed. I had him first year, but, you know, but you have to understand that when in reality of practicing architecture, window is just the thing that frames, right? So there's many different windows. And so first year was all about deconstructing the language so that you could get down to take out the noise, as it was said before, and get down to the essence. And so that's the difference between teaching the practice of architecture and educating the intellect of architecture. You know, you have to take away those preconceived notions of what something is.
Now, where's Chuck? We were talking about that first, there's something magical about the first day, right? You walk in, 8 a.m., you're the first architect, you're the first college person they see. And you give them, as Chuck said, a red balloon and a piece of string. And you tell them to make something architecture.
I think you gave us a rock.
Oh, I
No, you
did.
gave
That's
us a
right.
rock.
I gave you guys a rock.
Either a seashell or.
You still have the rock, don't you?
I'm afraid to draw it.
And someone told me last night about copper wire, I believe, Egger.
3 feet of copper wire and a red balloon.
Is that red balloon?
Wire.
That's it.
4 feet of copper wire.
Something to make something architectural to constrain the balloon.
What was your response when you got the rock?
Got like Charlie Brown. To put it into perspective and to tie into what people said. For me, the program, yes, we were in the College of Architecture, but really what we were getting was a design education. And what I take away most, and I say this very often to anyone, even whether people in my office or not, what we learned was to teach ourselves, to find answers, to struggle with things, to test ideas, to filter givens and sort of bring them together, make an effort to try to filter them and then understand what they are, and then do it again, and little by little, deterministically, you find a way, the same way that Patty was saying about sort of you find your way here. You know, we have all the tools. We had all the tools, and now you have even fancier tools. It's still the same thing. There's design tools that you have, and each person sort of finds their way, one of them or two of them or half a dozen of them. And maybe halfway through school, we might find another one and or go back to one. You know, I have for me, coming to tech was a big opener. I do remember after I told the story last night to somebody, but my first semester is the first B I ever got. And I remember going into Ron's office and saying, you know, I want to talk to you about my grade. You know, I said to me, don't listen to anything we say. And I just.
Sort of like that.
I didn't understand.
Here, back here.
It's just kind of like, he said, I think he said if you didn't,
We can't hear back here.
oh, sorry. So he said,
don't listen to anything he
he said you don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he said, I think you probably would have gotten a worse grade if you didn't have all this stuff. And yeah, my desk was piled with stuff and I had a Mike Brady kind of assumption of what an architect was. And I took those mechanical drawing classes. And when I saw the rock, I said, I don't know how to draw. I don't know how to draw. I do that. It wasn't until a few years, when I had access to all those other design opportunities and photography and printmaking and things, that something clicked and it was okay that I couldn't draw. But in my head, the person that I am, I wanted to draw because I couldn't draw. So I saw everyone drawing next to me. And so I think about how do you teach during COVID if you can't see what's next to you?
Very hard. Yeah.
And then last night, Mark, that slide, but that, I think it was Sean's slide. There was a quote from Egger that had the word, I think heuristic in it. And its Greek roots is to discover. And so you were talking about finding, but maybe it was repeated discoveries, maybe self-generated discoveries or self-imposed will to discover. But I think that's kind of a critical aspect of that's purposeful.
But I remember too, the professors that stand out.
To be a little louder, please. I mean,
Microphone or something.
I'll get
Stand up.
Stand up.
Raffle.
That don't work back there. Come on up front.
So what I remember also too was there was a kind but not a soft-handed critical discussion. So you could say something like, you don't listen to anything I say, and it wasn't an attack. It was a challenge. It was to somehow spurn something. And Gene was very much like that. Obviously, we all know that, where he would just make an offhand comment, and it wasn't personal. It was about the work. It was about trying to find another way of looking at something where he may not agree with anything that was on that paper, but somehow he found something to talk about and to get you to step out of that comfort zone. A lot of the professors obviously have a similar. I can remember those same desk discussions. But for me, it was one of the other things too. Somebody said something yesterday, and I see it now in the office when people start to talk about the work, and I remember it back, and that I think it was Gene that said something to the effect that architects talk, but architecture speaks. So for me, that's something that's always sort of, when I'm drawing, I'm trying to see if it's, the drawing is speaking to me, I'm speaking with the pen, but I'm always thinking outside of that. If somebody else is looking at that and I'm not there, does the drawing have that depth that we see in those drawings that somehow somebody else can look at it and take from it? Obviously, when you make a piece of architecture, you're not there to explain why you made a decision. It's either obvious or it's not. And walking through a building, you're the critic of that particular piece of architecture, and it's different than the experience that somebody else has because they have a different set of experiences. To me, the sort of, I think of it as a kind criticism was what I remember the most about him, because he was willing to just say, in a way, this is garbage, but he didn't say that. He said, why don't you look at this? Or why don't you take a step back or do a different type of delivery for whatever it is? And somehow it just, you find your way through there. And I when I see resumes now, when I see hiring, and I see, big white pieces of paper, little tiny images, or hyper realistic projects and no design. And the drawing part of that is something that I still hold very dear to me. And we try as best we can to get everyone to draw. I personally cannot use the computer very well, and I'm okay with that. But I see in the next generation of resumes that we're getting that can't draw, right? So if you can't draw, it's hard to make the jump to the computer. There are very few people that can use the computer and think in 3 dimensions and draw with the computer. You have to be able to draw before you use the computer. And it's very, very hard.
You know, anyone go around and just listen to what the spaces and buildings say to you? I don't know. I've been in spaces where I'm hearing what the building's saying to me and people think I'm off the wall. You've got to be able to talk with what you see and then try to understand it, to absorb it between the thick skull. See it, hear it, and like stop to be there, just to absorb it.
Yeah, working with students, I think my job, all I'm doing is reading their work out loud. And it's really great to hear what you're seeing.
I wanted to go back to everybody here who was a student remembers the first project.
Yes.
Day.
Let's go there.
And I want to talk a little bit about maybe why that is. Because I've thought a lot about it because it's stuck in my head. It doesn't go away. And it's very, very specific. I remember the whole day. I remember everything about it. And, everyone at the time, and I don't know if it's the same now, it may be a little bit different, but for many of us, the entire first year class, no matter which studio you were in, and that was a little fluid at the time, but everybody got the same thing. It was the same assignment to everybody, same time frame, same, there was no differentiating, slightly the program for these folks or these folks. And when I think back on it, what it was is it broke something in my head. It kind of snapped something off and made a break. And I've heard, there are lots of cliches about, not carrying forward, what you think and get rid of what you think you understand. But the essence of what that is, for me, it gave me, when I look back on it, I started to be able to think about what I did know and the experience I brought to it, because every kid's got like 18 years of experience. They don't come as a blank slate, so you can't make them a blank slate. But that break allowed me to start thinking differently about how I used the experiences and the information and knowledge I guess I thought I had when I applied it to a question or a program or a problem that was presented to me. And then the rest of Foundation felt like, a series of questions and problems that were presented to me. And I really didn't have the ability to think about them anymore the way I may have before I came here. And I don't know if that's something everybody got together and understood really well, or whether it was all still sort of you're trying things to see what happens and it works better for some students than others. But that's how I feel like it worked for me. And then I can really look at, my practice is pretty varied right now. I sometimes do buildings, I sometimes do websites, I sometimes do museums and exhibits and things. It's all over the place. But somehow when I'm getting ready to start, there's a core set of questions that we didn't have all red balloons. Our year was just a piece of copper wire and a balloon.
They were all
And
red.
They're all red.
Were they?
All red.
Well, I've remembered it in the way that it works best for me.
Mark concurred because I was in Loosely Eggers. I think you were Ron.
I was in Ron's studio.
Donna.
And the assignment was
Don
make a
and Bob
restraint
Seeger
for the
can
balloon.
confirm.
It was not do something architectural. It was not, it was
Orderly
make a
restraint.
restraint for the balloon.
Ooh, orderly.
Spraying the balloon.
And
yeah.
That's
so
more
you
Egger.
had material to work with. You had an assignment of sorts, a program, however loose that was. There were logistics involved because no one had been to Mishmish. No one knew where to get a wire or a balloon.
We were given the
And-
wire.
Were we given the wire?
It was in the lobby.
But at some point we had to go down to, okay.
Mythology at work.
So all the other people who are in class
We
with me
forget our
right
first
now, let me have my memory the way that I have my memory.
Get it, and then we were sent to Mishmish to get newsprint to draw it.
Okay, because eventually we had to draw it and, you know, it built on itself. So you, again, very quickly, you were responding to materials, you were figuring out what you need to do something, you don't know why. And when I talk about that kind of feeling of being confounded by everything in the whole environment and situation at the time, and the faculty weren't there kind of guiding you or helping you. So again, you still had to rely on sort of what you already knew, what you came there knowing. You didn't really dismiss that, but you used it differently. And then over time, you kind of learned what that was about, and you learned a little bit about why you were doing that. And so that first, I mean, if you're going to talk about pedagogy, I mean, that first project is so important. I still feel like sometimes when I get started to work on something, I've got a wire and a balloon in front of me. And, you know, and I've got to figure out how do I answer, what is a question that's there that
Terry, that was
given to me.
I'm going to interrupt you because you always let me do that.
And you're good at it.
I'm good at it. There was something else about that first day which really stuck in the mind, is that rolling out that butcher paper in the lobby and how we talked about these products. That we didn't set them on the ground. We didn't pin them up. We didn't set them on our desk. There was no individual person standing up and saying, this is what I did, right? It was, we set them out. And then there's a period of actually trying to understand. And I think the faculty were really, it's Bob, Donna, Ron, and Gene, and sometimes Ferrari. And they're walking around, they're looking at this, they're actually talking to each other too. And we're like, what's going on here? You know, because the act of putting that paper, I think rolling that paper on the ground was critical. The fact that we were all in the lobby, the fact that now there was no, you know, this is Donna's studio, this is Bob's, this is Ron's. It was just, we're walking around and all of a sudden a conversation starts, and it starts between the faculty. And pretty soon it's drawing students in. And it was like, oh my God, I'm learning, even though no one spoke about my work my entire freshman year.
Well, from the very beginning.
You were invited into it in multiple
Yes.
ways, and maybe you
Yes.
were cognizant and maybe you were not.
Yes.
And your comment, Mark, about to be critical about the work
Yeah.
and how that started. I have a first day story that resonates all the time, forever with me. And if you remember, Edgar would say, what does it bring? You know, like, what's the next thing? What does that bring? What does that bring? So I don't remember he said that on the first day. And this was actually the second day, because the first day I was like traumatized. I don't remember the first day, but I remember the next assignment. And the next assignment was we had to make a cube, and we had to take a Strathmore, Bristol board pad and make a 8x8 cube or 10x10 cube. And in those days, the Strathmore had a window cut in the yellow cover. And the first sheet had a rainbow printed on it, right? And so some poor soul had made their cube and had made one of the faces of the cube with the rainbow on it. And there were 100 people transferring in that summer, and I was in the group of 50 with Edgar, and room 100 had the paper and had the cubes on it. And Gene's pacing back and forth, and he's kind of looking at the cube, and he's going to go in, and he doesn't, rainbow, and he's just getting us to look at it. And then he picks up the cube. And he turns around the rainbow and he goes. And then he puts it down. Now, this sounds really mean. And it wasn't mean, because you have to think what that brought. So he says, at either end of room 100, there's a trash can. Remember the big steel drums? And he says, as you go to your desk, you may want to put your cube into the trash can. And so everybody went, it's a great tale. It's a true tale. And everyone went, well, and there were long lines, one by one, we had to make a deposit. And so a couple people didn't. I think the rainbow person left. I think they didn't come back. But the moment you got back to your desk, and you had sketches of that and things, I think we detected it then, or at least it was the invitation in, that all these stories we hear today and last night about, I'm in another world, where am I? It's foreign to me. Even in that world, you were able to become a critic of your work the first day. And you were invited into that, which was really a beautiful equation. Where am I? I'm not telling you, the faculty's not telling you. How do you criticize your work? It was really interesting. So you're like, what am I trying to do? How might this transmit? He picked the most extreme example that, well, it's obviously the rainbow isn't the point. It's like, but what is this about? And how do I make decisions about it? Because that's up to me. And the environment can sustain you with that. And that's
Shelley,
a really beautiful lesson.
I think it's good because you take the trauma that all of us had on that first day.
I don't even remember our first day. You're like, what happened?
You're giving it reason, right? You're going, this is how. And I think it goes back to the original question that you primed us for in this room, because I don't know the right answer.
Yeah.
An education that we got in the 80s, Terry, you talked about it like being an era, right? Of a very tight group of people. I could hear Reagan talk about the 70s.
Right.
And it's like we brought in the guy who could take an engine apart and put it back together because no one else would come. And we figured out how to teach that. This work, not that any of it is bad, but it's very normative, right? And it's sad if in 5 years, the only impact was that first day. Like, I want to hear fourth year students, fifth year students go, oh my God, right? And I think the problem is the education has become the process of professionalism.
Well,
And I don't know how you get, because I don't think that's what I got at Virginia Tech in the 80s.
I don't think that's what's being delivered now.
Come on, I never saw this in Virginia Tech in Kogel in the 80s.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying I don't think it's what's delivered.
Temple, Penn, everything, and everyone's got the same thing, same model, same storyline, same work. I can't differentiate. It's a rare case that I see a resume and a portfolio and I go, oh my God, I've never seen it like that. I showed a portfolio in the 80s in Philadelphia, and it shocked people, either in a positive or negative way. I think the profession in the schools has become so normative. We have this thing. So do we. We have a little version. We're doing this, we're doing that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I don't know the solution to it. That it's sad that we have to go back and go, now that first project was the most
No, because I think one of the solutions to that is to say that the phenomenon, if you will, that you can know nothing and you can still criticize that. So what do you bring in? How do you define architecture for yourself? And it's a romantic story to talk about what the first day is, but like Egger thought, what does that bring? It brings a behavior. He was a fierce protector of the environment, so you could draw from the environment. So the obligation to say, oh yes, you learn things yourself and you taught yourself. That's true. But that you were invited in to find ways to understand something that resonated with you forever.
That was such a paradigm.
That's why there's differentiation.
Yes,
That's why everything wasn't the same.
No,
Well,
I
I'm gonna
totally
say it's a
agree.
hybrid also. The students are hybrid. You will see hyper professionalized focused students. And I can go run into my office and Gates right here, sitting here's thesis book is a 10-pound block of concrete that he lugged around New York and brought to offices to talk about his practice. And he graduated 3 years ago.
And is
So
he,
we got
is he,
that.
I want to make this a discussion. Is he the exception or the norm?
No, I think there's a graph of super duper professionally focused students. And I think then there are students who are loose and aiming to take risk and make discovery. And we have it all now. And if you believe in what was said in the first meeting, like first section, that should be okay at one level, right?
I think being here and watching it, and over the years also alumni coming back and seeing things or the way they see it, and it's always really interesting. Sort of moment. There's a lot of the moment they were here was the golden moment, which is a natural,
It's over now.
which is a very natural thing. But you are seeing something in a kind of project that of what you're looking at. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there was a time in the before and in the 80s and through the 90s that
It was amazing.
how to put it. It was possible, and it was part and parcel of the consequence of these ideas. It was actually quite possible, and it was okay that some people found a way to float through the school and actually not be very present. So there was this, all these things, it was this activity or who, if you think about over the years, how many people actually were in room 100, let's say, just listening to something, versus how many were in the class, versus what would show up, but in our days of people taking the initiative to put things up, where eventually we decided, and there's good and bad in that the fifth year have multiple times where everybody's got to show what they're doing. And there are these documents that have to be done, which we didn't do. And you find out a lot more about what that range is. And the truth of the matter is there was always this range of how somebody was approaching what they were doing. And I think a lot of times we do now see a lot more of it. And I think there are also, to see these things, you say, okay, my God, there's some things about the way we're making things or the ease of one way or something of making it. The range of where somebody was, getting an idea or something. I guess the other thing I want to say about this, thinking about this, everybody's talking about like the first day or the first year being a trauma, or I heard someone.
It was a trauma.
The gentleman here personally liked it about, because I had taken mechanical drawing, actually was allowed to do an extra session of it. I like drawing so much in high school. And I've known students that, are desperate to draw a floor plan. I don't know why. That I, having done that and was quite capable at it, that I didn't have a reaction like that. It's like, okay, let's go, go do these things. And it wasn't until 4 weeks into it that Egger had, asked us to make an isometric drawing. And I was making that drawing. It's the first time he ever really directly spoke to me, came around and he said, Pittman, you're left-handed. And he could see that I could make the drawing, but he saw I was left-handed. Hey, your own damn problem. Walked away. But it's interesting how to figure out, because I think it's super important about these questions about how to think or what the threads are. And one of our biggest problems is that it's really hard for a student. I mean, they can do it with us, but the kind of self-directed or taking poetry, or I basically had a minor in urban affairs and in philosophy, and wasn't even thinking of, we didn't think that way, that I wanted the credential.
But everything now has to be usable.
I have been in the arguments as the core curriculums and stuff have been made in the name of making something, that everybody has a diverse education, that as far as we were concerned, it killed it. Because it says you have to do this, and this under somebody's realm. But it's really interesting to be here, sort of go through it and then think about, moments we complain about stuff and, of what we see or how it's working. But one thing I think is this history of sort of what that in a big school, what that cross section always was of that we see, and our job about also somewhere, that there's a job about competence in there too. It's both somehow.
I mean, how big, big was like the first year in architecture in the 70s and 80s?
9,800.
Okay, because we're about
I know, in the
sometimes
80s.
130 to 150 students per class. It's-
Our class in 1979 had 155 and
Okay.
120 graduated.
Every class 1970 was 250. We had 170 graduate.
So Hilary, I'm curious.
We were more.
Excuse me,
You
Mark.
made a comment about there's a hyper-professional side of the
There
school.
I mean,
And a sort of an.
students find their, students still find their way through the 5 years, right? And there are some who really track and select the faculty they sign up for that would nurture a more professional approach. And then there are different faculty and like students gravitate towards, I don't know what to call, I mean, different
Version?
huh?
I'm curious as to how the split happened, or how you.
I think it's
How
the,
in a school of architecture, you would define the split that somehow that's professional and investigative and.
That's not.
Yeah, somehow that's.
I think that is, I know, I was speaking to the
I'm not
facsimile
disagreeing
of
that
the way
that
one presents.
happens, but I
in a
think as
professional
educators,
office.
because you're on the front lines of it, you have the hardest task of making sure that professionalism doesn't mean less.
Right.
It should mean more, right? It should be more engaging. When I think of what I got here, I got the tools to be a professional, right? I didn't get the tools to build a building. I learned that from the tools that I got here, right? So I.
And I think it's funny because Danae's Ron and Egger didn't say it, but Tom Reagan did. He said, we're teaching you to do something. You need to go out and change the profession. And I think I'm not being critical, but the notion that the schools are becoming more, we're following the profession, we're matching it, we're being in parallel, not always, but I think that's the risk that
Taking the lead.
I would argue, at least I know some critique the profession through the student work.
Yeah.
Okay. For sure, I know this happens in the school. But for sure, like the freedom afforded to the students is also freedom afforded to the faculty. And so this has always, I'm going to say, been a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? Which is when one has total freedom, I mean, anything can kind of happen. And so when does one establish limits and when does one afford greater freedom? And, how is it when, I don't know, you guys talk about a cadre of like 5 faculty together who are really generators for a pedagogic method. And now it's twice as big per year and across however many people getting like-mindedness. And I don't know if we want in what way like-mindedness. This is a question. It's a big question, it's a beautiful question.
No, but I think right here, we always.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm doing it again on follow. I think also that the work was public. And it was public as soon as that roll of white paper was put on the ground. And I think the discussion is public. And I think that nature of the desk, and this is something that Jim you were saying in one of your little videos about the desk, about the work being public. And to me, that's a really powerful statement that it's not private. And as soon as we actually fully adopt this world of okay, I've got earphones plugged in or headphones on, or you're putting these walls and you're basically saying this. You're saying, what happens in here is my education. And I think that the pedagogy here was not that at all. It's like, we're not even going to talk about what's in there. We're talking about this. And I think that nature, I think this is fantastic as part of a discussion.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I believe that discussion is something that's carried forward into practice as a means of practice.
Well, what is
Right.
forward facing in that public realm?
Yes.
That is not performativity. I mean, it was never performativity, no matter what you were making it through. But I think, the the kind of opaque nature of digital practice. It's in the laptop and then it comes out, things of performativity sometimes, right? And that's a managed thing, like, I don't know the diagram, if you saw on the board, model, measure, manage, design, science, culture, and it was first year, second year, third year, fourth year.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I think it brings that question about what is it that you're doing and what is it that you're showing? And so there's a kind of disconnect maybe that you see between this wall and this wall. I think this is in this wall, but maybe it's not forward facing. Does that make sense? I believe it's in that wall, but it's not as forward facing as this wall.
You know that the drawing that Sean is next to, you know how students pin up and sometimes they leave their work on the wall for years? That drawing has been there since 1987. These questions remain. I think Bob used to have a T-square shape of a question mark.
Yeah, Michael.
Hanging in his office. Does some of you remember that?
Michael.
And that was a nice thing, about schools and the profession. Not a very practical tool. I have a quick first day story. I wasn't educated here.
But we let you in.
Other school. This is where I got my education, right? So I come in 2 weeks before classes start in 1987 in the summer, and my dad bought me a really nice New York briefcase. In there, I had typed an assignment because I thought, I better type it up, and but it was 2 weeks before classes start. I walked across Price's Fork, we rented, and I came in and this man came out of the dentist's office and he was tan and had these big movie star glasses on. And I didn't know who it was. He walked up to me and he said, "I'm Charles Burchard." And he didn't ask me who I was. So I made some Xeroxes in the dean's office. That's where we always went. I went home and Lynn said, "How was your first day?" I said, "No one was there." I said, no one was there. But just like a student, I was confronted with an environment that I had never been in before. And I quickly learned, don't type the assignment up, or if you type it up, keep it to yourself. Just speak it, just say it. And then the ambiguity ensues. As soon as you write it, students start looking up the words and trying to parse it out. So for me, that first day was revelatory. And I got nothing accomplished. I went home and waited 2 weeks to start. But, I thought you type an assignment up. So I had the same sort of, it was a little bit of a shock that I had no idea what I was getting into.
Since Frank.
Chuck, you had something.
I'd forgotten about the T-square, but it was a real thing. And it had multifunctional capabilities, because on one side, you could draw all the orthogonal lines, and you could move to the right and draw French curves without changing tools. So but let me just, I have a slightly different take, because this is a discussion about pedagogy. Now, everyone has a remembrance of the results of that pedagogy. In a sense, they tend towards, move at moments that change their perspective or change their work or change their life. And it seems like that's kind of an ongoing discussion every time we have a meeting like this. I think we're also at a threshold, because I think Sean's right, not directly from a one-to-one correspondence, but I think he's right about education and the profession. There is much more pressure coming in from the outside to make students like that, rather than the education changing the profession. That was one of the elements, I think, of the pedagogy, the way it started. But there were some strategic moves done early. One strategic move was Jim Kramer was brought into the school. It was in the early 2000s. He was the one who founded Design Intelligence. So he's running this operation that became a big machine of expertise in the world of design, particularly for programs in architecture. And it had, some of you remember, it had national rankings. And tech was always in the top 5 of those national rankings. Now, whether you agree, there's a lot of arguments whether they were good or not, but that doesn't really matter. It was there every year. We could say tech one year was number 1, then it was 2. And it was back and forth between schools. and they had certain advantages. So there's all questions you could challenge the rankings, but they were there. And they were very, very public. And I think parents thinking about where their kids should go to school, they looked at those rankings if they're interested in architecture. So for better or for worse, we had that, and it gave the school a very strong foundation within the university. The university has changed radically. It's grown around the School of Architecture, the College of Architecture, well, the program of architecture, differently than it was in the past.
And physically.
Well, physical,
Where am I?
the physical part's going to come no matter what. That's inevitable. But then the whole dynamic of the situation within is now just a school by itself, within this gigantic organization that's a university, has changed radically. And how that voice is kind of exerted, I think, needs kind of a whole new framework in terms of what's happening. Because pedagogy is hard to, you can't just say it was good, and you can't just explain it with one anecdote, particularly if you say, I was scared to death first year. People from the outside have no idea what that means. They think about it as something questionable. But so the question is, how does the pedagogy come to life, or how are we given tolerance to maintain that pedagogy, even though it not meet the standards that the university is trying to apply?
That's harder to do now.
It's much, much harder to do. So it's, in one sense, it's the power of persuasion. And that's where I think you all still could come in, all the alumni. So I'm not just talking to this audience, but all the alumni could come in a lot more in terms of not just saying it was great because this changed my life here, but somehow documenting a little bit, what that pedagogy was. So in a sense, there's kind of simple things, but the whole world of structuring an environment. I think the school was really one of the best, particularly in the 80s and 90s, in terms of what's the structured environment to provide occasions, spontaneous occasions for students to learn from each other. I think in that pedagogy, there is the belief that the students learn as much or more from their peers over the 5 years than they do at any one course or any one studio. But how to keep that energy going is a difficult thing to say, we just need this or we need that. And it's hard to make university administrators aware of that kind of thing. I think before we had sympathetic administrators who knew what it was. Now it's somewhat changed completely in terms of that voice. So there has to be a constant argument development. This whole world, I think to say it's not professional, I think gives them a lever to say, well, you need to change some things, or you need to compress. You don't need as many resources. So, because that whole world is particularly in architecture, it's national. It's at every school.
Yeah.
It's clearly at the national AIA. And what's going on there is a real kind of controversy in terms of what voice are they going to send out, not only to the general public, but what voice are they going to send out to the NAAB, which is the accrediting team, and how it then filters into the schools. And we need the whole thing to be a positive trajectory, or basically it's going to fall on deaf ears if it's broken.
Everything is saying
Bob,
conformity, even the university.
We appreciate your big vision of the process here over the years. You see the big picture.
Yeah, and it's funny because for everyone in an office, there's no such thing as pedagogy. Anyone who sits in an office can't even define that word. What we define is culture. And it's the same concern that you guys on the one hand have about pedagogy, which produces a culture. I sit in an office that has acquired 4 firms in the last 2 years and will double its size in architects in another year. I have no control over that. That's where the industry is going. What I do have control over is culture. And I'm at well, how do you do this, right? It's such a struggle to push that. And the culture of the 80s is different than the 90s. What do you hold? What do you do? You guys talk about it from one vantage point. For anyone who sits in an office, who runs an office, who can measure the feel of an office, the equivalent is the culture of it. And you go, how do you control it?
But don't you think offices have pedagogies in a way, right? Because it's the higher, some
They never
offices.
call it that.
Yeah.
I want to hire someone who can come in and work tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
That's
but
it. And then
she's just like a way of learning, right? It's a structure of how we learn together and grow together,
Yeah,
right?
and
It is
Sean-
environment.
And Sean Wheeler said it earlier, it's a practice.
Yeah.
Right? You don't do it once and go, we're done. We were talking about this in our office. Equilibrium doesn't mean things don't change.
Right.
It means things are changing constantly and you have to accept that.
Within our program, when it starts, we start the freshmen with the familiar and the strange, right? And which we talked about. And I'm thinking that with the professional practice, if someone is bringing a hyper reality, so to speak, to this educational environment that you're reacting against negatively, why is it not a little bit on the educator to talk to them about how to make that strange? And I'm reminded, Bob, that one of the most professional things, which I thought was amazing at the time, the Salem school building, the preservation book you made with Michael Patton, and you took a very professional activity of saving an old building in 1983-4, which was not common. People weren't saving old buildings, they were destroying them. And you presented it with the familiarity of professionalism and the strangeness of enjoying the building in many ways.
But the other thing I think
Was a little bit different.
I think this dichotomy about professionalism and exception is false, and it doesn't need to be, because in some ways, if we make everybody an exception, then we're back, everyone's normal. So exception means something beyond or different than what the group is. So I think we're always going to have groups of students that are different in terms of their abilities. And part of the pedagogy was to try to recognize that and support it.
Yeah.
So there were some students who did excel, say what some people believe excel in design. But there are other people who had different kinds of abilities. There's some people who could organize. There's some people who believed in administration. So they were all kind of encouraged to go their own way, but we wouldn't recognize them all as saying what you're talking about, is some of the exceptions were pretty weird. But in a sense, maybe that weirdness has been dulled a little bit in terms of, what happens at the end of the year in terms of the homogeneity of the presentations. But I think it's still there, but that's the question in terms of trying to manage that. But we're going to have, we've got 750 students. They're not all going to be exceptional in that world of design that gets awards.
So Bob,
I need to step in and manage for a minute here. So,
Can I just make an observation about
closing,
something
right?
I think-
And some of this can continue, last word.
Very, very quick. As I walked out into the studio, I just want to bring this back, brings it back to your very first question. I'll be very quick. Bob is right about the pressures, but when we were here, a lot of us learned a process of how to think, and it was reprogramming heart. It's not about the first day, it's about the process we learned. Whether it was roll out on the first floor or whether it's a roll on your desk or whatever. First floor, first studio over here, their first year, first few months. I walked a couple desks right out here. There's a young woman building a little model and has little models around and some sketches, very crude sketches, but very good. And she's trying to figure something out. And the young woman right next to her is completely on the computer with this very rendered of a form that, they're supposed to be generating. And that is the problem we're dealing with today. There are a lot of people that are jumping into the computer and producing imagery, but there's no there. There's no thought, it's just I'm creating a beautiful image because that's what they think we all want when you come out. Yeah, we do want you to have those skills, but we want that thought process. So if there's anything education can do, is still go back to that foundational idea of getting people to rethink, reprogram, whatever you want to call it. Those first years, but catch that student, say, look, this is really wonderful. You're going to use those skills later, but I need you to use your hands and your mind and your sketch. I need you to leave the computer over here, and I need you to do what your colleague next to you is doing right now, to rethink, because that's what's going to be the difference, Bob, I think, in going forward. Everybody will go their own ways, but what you all gave us was a way of thinking and approaching problems. And that was what was really good about this place. It still is. But I think we got to capture those who are going over here, give them that first bit and then let them go. We all want good things in the end, but we want more depth. We want some thought.
Sneak in one beautiful young voice to contribute to the conversation.
As a response to that,
The project we're currently working on is actually a combination of different materials. So part of it is going to be physical and part of it's like we have to use multiple materials for this project. And we've recently exploring a lot of different ways to like encounter those materials. So like wood in the wood shop versus like rockite making, and different ways to make molds for rockite and laser cutting and 3D printing. So we have to explore multiple of those. And I believe the student you were talking to is currently working on making something to laser cut, which I actually talked to her the other day, and she's also planning on making a rockite model as part of that. So it's not, I think it's kind of unfair to see it as just computer based because I feel like, especially in this studio, which is Ron's studio, it's a lot of interaction between, like, if you wouldn't see you don't see all the smaller models we made on the desk because they're currently all on the shelves. And we've been focusing a lot on hand making and physical creations. I think it's just it happened to come at a time when
Just to wrap up, we're gonna close because then 10 minute study abroad starts. But I think the title of this section had something to do with making in it. And so I think, in the 21st century, actually, how does one relate the direct making with my own hand through a vehicle, which might be this, a 3-head, 3-axis, laser cam or whatever, it is evolving, right? And so mediating, right, between these different forms of making is something that is being grappled with in the educational environment. So I think unless you guys have something to say, we got 10 minutes, we got to start study abroad.
Oh my God.
We're going to hear from Egger now. I think this is, the longest clip. It's about 5 minutes. So, and then we're going to stay on the video for a while. Heinrich's going to show a little bit of orientation about study abroad that he has in slides. And then we'll shut it up and focus again on conversation.
I'm going right to my desk, right?
So, I guess,
And only 2 years into that competition, and the year before, my old roommate had won it, and he traveled throughout Europe with this money. And so that's what I wanted to do. So I spent 10 months in Europe hitchhiking and fumbling around and chasing monuments and culture and sketching, trying to learn to sketch. So when I came here with Ferrari, I knew the program existed, and I told him I really wanted to be part of it. So, sure enough, boom, I got up over my head the first summer. So it was a summer program before, and then Ferrari and Lucy always wanted a base that we could have a studio, and then travel also. So that became the big search, and I guess the first one was in Zurich. With Carl Flag, he found a place where the guys could hold up, and Hans went on that one once. And then slowly, contacts in Basel came up and found a wonderful studio in Basel, and they lived in hotels around, or an old hotel across the river. But that was the first studio we had in really full-blown studio with desk and everything in Basel. And so the thought was that we could buy that building, university could buy that building, and Charles Steger was very excited about it and was talking to the president about it. And it got very close to being able to purchase that studio because there was an apartment above that we, faculty could stay in. It was perfect. And then the dummy that owned the thing began to talk about some under-the-table money so he wouldn't have to pay so much taxes. And boy, that cut it off immediately. The university backed off and said, no way in the world we're going to touch this man. So then Ferrari and Lucy moved it to Lugano, and we had one hotel there named the Aurora. It was a little two-star hotel that that really was a good base. I mean, we used that as a base to go out and you could live there and almost control the whole hotel. Even in Salzburg, the early days, we had we saw that more as a studio and had exhibitions. Lucy and I started the first exhibition there in University of Salzburg. We had a classroom at the University of Salzburg, which was dead center of the old town of Salzburg, and we would visit there with bicycles, come and go from the village. So there was always that notion of a studio in Europe, and then you traveled to supplement that. And slowly, after a few years in Lugano, we had a studio there over an old printer, industrial printer, a top floor, big warehouse-like space. And then that got a little too complicated for some, I forget all the reasons. So Charles Steger was slowly working harder and harder to think how to get a place, how to make a center. And so the story is the Ferraris were looking at Lugano, everywhere around Lugano, because they knew Lugano quite well. Ferrari's family had a little place outside of Riva, which is a little town called Agno. And so they were in a little village run Catti, Lucy and Ferrari having lunch in a little village. And they drove up through Riva. And at the time, what's her name, Flora Rouchart had pushed the Ticino architects into making that first exhibition that was done in Zurich called Tendenza. And she lived there in Riva, and they didn't know her, and the woman has never come to the villa. But anyway, they were driving up from, it's only about 6 kilometers, and passed this old villa and looked at it, and it was run down. And they thought, oh, what is that? So they went right to the town hall and met the mayor, who was, his name was Bianchi, Carlo Bianchi, and he was the director of a graphic design school in Lugano, so he was completely sympathetic. So they met him, found out that thing was for sale, and then the ball started to roll. And they went back and met the owners of that old house. The owners had turned the house into a little bed and breakfast, like what we'd call a bed and breakfast. They were apartments inside, all through the villa. And they were 80 years old, I think, at the time. And they fell in love with the Ferraris. And you can imagine, I mean, Ferraris was an absolute charmer, and so was Lucy, is Lucy. But then the ball started to roll to acquire that place. Because we'd seen another place in Lugano, outside of Lugano, north part of Lugano, and that got complicated because the owner sold it out from under us. And all things worked out for the best because it was not the best location. It was a great house with several other houses around it. But it would not have been what we have now.
So in 1989, I think we see a turning point in our study abroad program. So Gene Egger mentioned this. 1989 was when Ferrari and Bill Brown, some of you may still know, remember Bill Brown, were visiting Riva San Vitale to see what potential we could have in this particular location. So I happened to be on the study abroad program with Bill Brown. So Ferrari said, you just have to come along, you have to take a look at this place and see whether that's suitable for our programs. So the building was filled with old people. There were treacherous fireplaces and ovens and various kind of makeshift kitchens. But
Ferrari said, "Just let's put all of that aside. Can you see through all of that?" And of course, Steger came on later and the bill was purchased. And so I see this as a turning point in our study abroad programs. Of course, 1969, if Ron is here, correct me, I think that was the first Salzburg program. And so programs were ongoing since 1969 all the way through 1989. In 1984, the first residency program took place. So after the villa was first undergone its first renovations, there were some students there, but in 1984, the first residency program began. Gene Egger was a resident faculty 4 times in Riva San Vitale, but since the Salzburg program, Egger was practically every year involved in all of the ongoing programs. So it was initially summer, then Ferrari and Egger had this idea there should be really a fall travel program and it should be built in the 5-year curriculum. So eventually the fall travel program came about in about 1997. Sorry, 1987.
Yeah, that's better. You're time tripping me now. Don't be tricking me.
1987.
Okay.
1989, the villa was purchased.
Right.
1994, the first residency program started. All travel took a little pause, but started up again in 1996. And then pretty much was then a separate program from the residency program every year. So we had these 2 parallel programs, Riva in the fall and in the spring, and the fall travel program only in the fall. And this has resulted essentially that about 80% of all of our students actually went abroad. So every year in the various programs. There are other programs for study abroad, which are bilateral exchange programs and other things, but they are completely minor compared to what the bulk of our programs were. In 1999, Gene approached me the first time to say, can you help me out? So the planning, the logistics of the program. Of course, I said, it's my pleasure. And then we started to figure out what we can do. In 1989, we, in addition to a summer program, we also had a workshop with Vitra at a chateau in France at Bois Bichet. And that was also an amazing event because Gene, normally not known for this kind of super hands-on table saw shop work, suddenly became the assistant to the students there and helped them in the shop and you know, even welding, you know, I never saw Gene welding anything except at Bois Boucher. He said, let me try this too, right? So that was just, for me also quite amazing to see this. Frank said yesterday, with multiple genes, right? Here's the welding genes. This was an interesting material because we had 2 designers from the Netherlands actually leading the workshop. And so we were just support, just like students there as well. And I think he very much enjoyed that. He also drew quite a lot. While we were at Bois Bichet, it was kind of infectious. The students immediately sat down and after they had worked all day, they started drawing what they had worked on. It was quite an amazing, different kind of engagement that I remember with Gene. In 2007, he handed it completely over and said, I don't want to have anything to do with the logistics of the program anymore. I just want to be on the program. And so yesterday we heard already a few excursions into Gene's mind how Italian he actually was. And it just happens to be, so from 2007, so my records go, my extensive records go back to that, all the way to 2019. Well, sorry, this is my records, but Gene's last participation was in 2014. And so between 07 and 2014, it was basically a given that he told me that. He said, we need to go to Italy because I have the largest experience in what I can communicate to the students. And so in our travel itineraries, no matter where Italy was, that's where always Gene's participation. And so it gets to drawing. So while we were on those various study abroad programs, so I was not always with Gene. I had maybe 2 or 3 times I was overlapping with Gene. We were always in pairs, in maybe 3 segments or 4 segments. So one time I paired with Gene, I know in Italy. One time we overlapped a little bit in Switzerland, but he was always paired with other faculty where we had 72 faculty slots over between 07 and 19. And 27 faculty participating. So Gene was one of the most frequent ones up to that time. And the interesting part that came out for me also was the way he was teaching on the road. And I had really some extraordinary moments. One time he told me, because I was talking in front of a building, and said, you don't need to tell them everything about this building that you know. You let them find out. And you have to figure out what is the stimulus that tickles the students. And that was a very interesting advice, that you say, okay, it's good to know about this building, but you have to figure out where you need to tweak it. And he said, whether here abroad or whether it's in the studio, when you teach, do not stand in front of the students. You always stand behind them and you direct them. Don't become the master, right? Find out where their inner strength is and direct them individually. And he did that in study abroad as well. So I remember one opportunity or one occasion where a student asked him to start up the sketch in the sketchbook. And Gene said, I will never draw in a student sketchbook. Student sketchbook belongs to you. It's your agency. And so, people looked over at Egger's drawings, but he would very, very often say, don't copy me, work the way you see it. And I think one of the most amazing things that he brought to the drawing culture of the Euro programs was really what Frampton also very eloquently called his X-ray vision. So my argument is that this was Gene's admiration for cubism. Multiple perspectives, multiple views tell more truth than a single perspective. And so the X-ray became always an analytical moment. He said it's very important that you take in the building from these multiple perspectives and you overlap them, because the condensed vision of that is ultimately what is more true about the situation. And there's, of course, principles of cubism that he implemented in his own way. And I think you can see it in all the sketches. You all know that Ronchamp, he drew multiple times, was one of his most wonderful or beloved places. And it was just fantastic to be with him at Ronchamp twice. And so every time, you know, he would say, we need to go on top of the pyramid and we're gonna look down because you see the church, which is outside, right? You see the church. And then you have to go inside and you have to understand that chapel's only the background for the church. And it's a tiny little place, but it's very precious. So you can draw the preciousness, especially looking at the south wall. But he said, in order to understand it, you really need to draw the church. So, you know, the site drawing, in a way, became very, very important to him. These are great memorable moments that I had with Gene and sort of his what I called earlier, the infectious way of encouraging people to think about what they see through drawing. The other advice that he gave very frequently to students, especially in our preparatory meetings, which we had usually every Wednesday for fall travel begins, or in the spring semester. So he would often say, don't forget that the duration of time that you spend with the object while you're drawing it is quality time, because it requires you to actually study what the delineation is of that space. And this, interestingly enough, he said the sketch is completely unimportant. That's only a record of how you think. The time spent with the object is the quality time that you acquire through the sketching. And so he disarmed the students also. He said the sketch never has to be beautiful. I'm sorry, the sketch never has to be pretty. The sketch is always beautiful. And I think that was also encouraging for the students. So behind the scenes, he would often point at sort of this picturesque postcard sketches. Some students made them picturesque postcard sketches, and he would often try to steer the students away from that and participate more in his X-ray vision. And you could see that the sketches ultimately they got much better in terms of their analytical capacity or communication also, not just to the author of the sketch, but I think to everybody in the program. So 2014, he participated the last time. 2015, he was scheduled to go to Riva, but he had some health issues, so that was kind of the last direct engagement that he had. The spectacular part is really that his drawing legacy is still alive. And I think many of my colleagues also understand this contemplating of a situation, an architectural condition, and the patience that it takes in order to make a proper record is extremely valuable in your architectural education. And I think this is maybe one of the most important parts in terms of its legacy in drawing in the study abroad programs. So I'm just gonna hold it here and want to open it for discussion. I would just want to point out two things. In my slides, I had a QR code for a series of books that Egger, with a little bit of my help, developed for what he called the bus library. So he said, well, we were in a bus, right? So might as well give the students suggestions to read. So I said, how do we do it logistically? Also, well, make a list of 50 books and
before we finalize the books, we weigh them. Because you're on the road, right? And we make sure they are not in the folio section, right? And so, so very interestingly, this list came about, and I have the QR code if you're interested. So what happens is that in 2008, we started to give these lists for by random selection. We gave basically the students a book that they had to purchase, either used, to bring. And then the books would circulate in the library, in the bus, as the bus library. So not everybody did extensive reading, but actually there were quite a number of students who really devoured 3 or 4 of those books while we were on the road. And Egger always argued, see, the intellectual engagement has to come sometime when they are at peace. And he said, there are 2 things that happen in the bus. Either they fall asleep or they are at peace. And so it was an interesting encouragement, and the bus library continued and is still like a beautiful part of our all travel program. I can't say too much about Gene's Riva participation, other than students came back and they said it was a wonderful time, and already some anecdotes. Was that 2015? Yeah, when he said he cannot go to Riva, he also said that he very much regrets that the university had to sort of take over a part of the Stiger Center, and it became a little bit university corporate. And I said that it put a damper on what he called it. Dream was to make an intensive care unit for architecture. So you would be hooked up to all of those architectural sources and just be squeezed into you. And then later on, it's because other colleges participated in a Riva program just in order to fill it. Architecture just could not fill the numbers, fill it every semester. So he regretted it a little bit because it was no longer this insular condition where he dreamed that push all of that architectural content into sort of a bubble where you just breathe it. Yeah. So my last slide in here, so I don't know if you can bring it up, but I will mention it verbally. I encourage you to participate in an exercise. You know, it doesn't have to be right now, but I'm sure all of you brought your sketchbooks, which Gene often used if a student did not want to draw. So he said, here's an exercise for you. Stare at a situation for 30 seconds. Just stare at it. And then take your pen, put it down on the sketchbook. Don't look at the situation again and just draw, but never lift up your pen. So he said, well, what you're gonna get in the end is a record of how you think about it. Right? So even if you say, oh, first I discovered this, I discovered that, and I discovered this, discovered that. So this kind of record of thinking, he said, is always going to be beautiful. And I think he was able to encourage a lot of students to discover how they were actually thinking about it, and they also loved their sketches. So I think a good time to open it up for discussion. And after the discussion, this is also Gene's encouragement. We produced documentation every semester. So this is 2012. Gene's forward is in there. And each student writes an essay, and the essay is read and edited. Then we put it together with some sample selection and photograph. And each student who participated in the program always got a copy or two. And
I added also to the end there, I snuck it in on the right. There was an exhibition of study abroad programs in Rome. And Gene wrote an introduction. It's in that sheet you're holding up there, Heiner. And so there's the 3 panels that were part of American universities who exhibited their travel abroad programs. So you guys can look at that. And then there's another attempt before these texts of something called Quarto. I don't know if that was exclusively devoted to European study or not, but there's an issue devoted to European study over time, which is that one. And it's got multiple pages.
Quattro.
Okay, Quattro Cause.
Four
Sal designed it, but inside, it's pretty fascinating because you have little single page essays from many of the leaders of study abroad over a period of time, maybe, like as it transitioned from the different folks who were primarily involved in organizing it. It's very nice. I found it in the archive, so a really nice document there that goes back prior to these other books.
Yes, many of you know Sal also. He said, we're not going to print it on 8.5 by 11. You can't put that in your purse. It's special.
So I think the thoughts are you guys, a lot of you guys went to study abroad.
So what is study abroad today? Is it fractured, or is it still a cohesive program of yearly summer and fall travel, or?
2019 was my last abroad program that I led and organized. Now Clive is organizing it. So we had a break in between because of COVID.
Forced break.
Because of COVID. So we also had a change in leadership. And sort of post-COVID and post-leadership change, still not quite overcome yet. And well, there are ripples, right? So I think in favor of our study abroad program, I say they're still quite robust. And I mean, times change. Many of you, when you went study abroad, most likely had not left the country. You had not seen Paris yet. This is no longer the case. So students already come with a kind of an abroad knowledge, right? They were abroad with their parents or high school. So this is, I perceive this as some change. But I think once they discover that the going abroad with a whole bunch of architecture students, your companions, is completely different than just going and seeing the Eiffel Tower. Right? And I think once that is understood, it's really still a very strong desire for the students actually to go abroad. And I mean, numbers have fluctuated. The largest group, I think, was with Gates, 2019, right? 2019, we're 46. Long trail.
Oh, architects, the 46.
Architecture student, yeah. Travel program.
I think all undergrad. I think they were all undergrad, right?
So out of a class of 125, maybe 120, so it was a significant chunk. And, if now I think of 20 going to Riva, it's another 40. So the rest is other abroad programs. It's still good. I mean, this was 2019. I don't know exactly what the numbers are right now, but
the numbers now, the travel program should be close to 30, and the 2 Riva programs are 25 one semester and 15 another. The conversation we had on pedagogy earlier, I was thinking like, wow, the building itself, Kogel itself, is like to hide a curriculum inside of a building is really interesting. And it's the same for the travel program. To embed or hide a curriculum inside of a travel program is a really interesting thing. And I was thinking that the students learn from one another. So a group of 30 or a group of 15 visiting a building is different than visiting a building on your own. They all talk about it and learn from each other. This set of photographs on the back wall were from the first group to return to Riva after COVID. And so that set of photographs, what I enjoy about looking at them is that there were 3 or 4 people standing next to each other when the photograph was taken, right? And they were all talking about what was the point of the photograph or what were they taking.
But on the other side of this wall.
On the other side of this wall, yeah. And so, yeah, it's still going and built on that model of 2 teaching faculty pairs taking the travel program. So 6 faculty divide up the semester in three pairs to run the travel program of about 50 to 60 days of continuous travel with independent travel in between. And then the Stiga Center is still running a spring and a fall semester. We have the studio above a stable, right? We've talked about many iterations of that studio, and this one is above the stable. The pressures from the university to make the Stiga Center a university building and shared amongst all colleges, I think is a good thing. An architecture student might meet their future spouse. Doesn't necessarily mean they're in architecture. They may be in another program at that building. It's quite a vital place. But I am really glad that the architecture program has a studio, right, and a lab, and the library from Olivio is still at the Stiga Center. And it is kind of the chunk that the architecture students occupy, and it's the place that they know is present. The first year students all know that it's there waiting for them, and the 5th year students all kind of recollect being there the previous year. It's still conducted in the 4th year of the studies here.
Can I jump in for a sec? I wanted to corroborate what you're saying and push back on what Gene said about the kind of coexistence of multiple, disciplines within the building. My experience, I traveled with Gene in the fall of '96. And over the course of that time, I think we went out most nights, had some grappa, did some sketching. And I think you could see just how formative the period was and encouraged me then to stay at the villa. After the travel program ended, my parents were really, excited about, me staying over there, costing more money and everything. But I stayed and the experience there, they had some international business students. Maybe the connections weren't as strong with them, but then there was like a philosophy class that was there, and they were reading Sophie's World, which is an excellent book. So we read it. They did a performance of it and involved us in the production, and it was awesome. I mean, it was just fantastic. The conversations just so happened, our little heads were exploding being over there and then having these conversations about philosophy. So I would speak in defense of that model because it had a big impact over there. And then one other thing is in the period of traveling with Gene before going to the villa, he didn't like the sketchbooks I brought over. He's like, those are shitty sketchbooks. He's like, you go over here, I think it was Il Papiro in Florence, and you pick up something with better paper and this and that. So I followed the order. And
There was a cult of Fabriano for a long time.
oh yeah, right, yes, Fabriano, totally.
Good reason.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then when he spotted one of the books I got, he goes, now you dedicate that to one topic, one field of study across the places we visit. So I made a little plaza book just about like public piazzas and kept a whole series of that. And to this day, that was like one of the most exciting sort of developments in my career. And I posted some of them down in the Laparello downstairs. So So anyway, I would say the single most formative year of my life spent over there, and he was a huge part of it.
You know, because we're here among a lot of alumni, and I manage and run a study abroad program since 2008. Say, with up to 75 students per semester, which is a whole different monster. But I want to tell you guys, as alumni, one of the most important things you can do is to put money forward for a scholarship for these young people. And it's something you can do right now, like today. You can make a dedication, because this is like the single most important thing that happens, I think, in the student's life, is they get this beautiful opportunity to let go of having to mow the lawn, or to go to another class, or to, you know, to watch a basketball hockey game or something. They don't have to do that anymore. They're over there and they're surrounded by, in this dense bubble of architectural tissue, they're surrounded by something which is going to open their eyes in ways that you know, is unpredictable. And Jordan's evidence of that. I almost wanted to fail him as a student. Joking aside, it's like when you guys come together as alumni, you want to make your voice contribute to this program. And I don't mean coming back and delivering a lecture on professional practice. Where's Terry? He's going to.
He's downstairs.
Okay, good.
I thought Jordan, you were going to say one of the benefits of your sketches was he had an art show in New York and he just sold copies of them for $100 each.
That was for scholarship fund.
It went to scholarship.
Yeah. No, I think this is important. I mean, I really do, because it's, and then to be able to communicate with a particular student afterwards, and they will tell you what they have learned and what they're coming back with.
Yeah.
And then, you know, years and years later, after that first 2007, 2008 trip that I put students on, I'm still running into former students, and they don't want to talk about anything else. I mean, it's about that very precious time.
Yeah.
You know, so it isn't just about first year. You know, first year kind of resonates to the program. It's also study abroad.
To your point, though, when I did that in '96, I think it was like a net equal cost. It wasn't like tuition plus all of these expenses, so it was far more achievable. Like it's
expensive.
So yeah, so I can't imagine that arrangement still exists today, and it's probably a lot more expensive.
You have to sell your firstborn.
Yeah. Well, if it could be my second, I'd consider it. She's the tough one.
Heinrich, you meant to what you said at the beginning, the infectious part of the sketching. And I think for that, it was 92, I was with Egger in that study abroad, but it was the first time, I think, as a student witnessing or being part of a teacher where it was through example, the same engagement we were doing sketching, they were doing sketching side by side. So it was like this learning by seeing and experiencing and talking that I think was infectious. And then the preciousness of the sketchbook. And you never kind of, once that grabs you, it's hard to ever let that go. And you know, even today, it's always in the professional world when we start a new project, it's like, let's just start. We talked about it in the previous session. How do we communicate architecture through words? But it's through that sketching. And before we even can communicate what you think you're going to do, it's because let's all sketch around to the table. Let's edit it and see what the big idea comes out through sketching. And then it's even in teaching today, the kids, like we were talking about earlier, they want to jump right to the computer. It's like, just take a pause. We went to the site. Draw it, even if we're not at the site, your first impression, just to get that movement physically, you know, the from the mind, using your body to just the act of architecture to experience it physically, and then let the other tools, you know, work with them. But it was those first moments, you know, especially traveling abroad, which was, yeah, so infectious.
One of our alumni in Hamburg commented on a group of architecture students actually sketching one of his projects, right? So they were all sitting down there in this courtyard and they were drawing this
award-winning project. And he said, well, you know, there are a lot of architecture students come by and see it. But this is the first group that actually had sketchbooks and draws. And then he steps out in front of the group and he said, it's great that you guys are sketching, because I can tell you this for sure. All the important decisions in architecture are made on a napkin. And if you can't draw that, you will never be in a position where you make an impact. And I think that had a great impression on the students also, this kind of ability. And, you know, it's true. You guys know it's true.
Well, creates a shared experience too, because like the table out here on the bus, not just the library, but those sketchbooks are passed. I mean, that happened on the Chicago and on the Boston trips as well. I mean, there's something about that is always shared. And it also creates, I mean, you guys walk around, I mean, how many of you have your sketchbooks with you? And it's like, well, this is who we are. I mean, there's a ritual to it, which then allows more meaning of your experience to sort of coalesce. That otherwise things are so fleeting in life. And that ritual of preparing space, preparing time, preparing the fountain pen, as opposed to, you know, other forms. I think Gene loved that long fountain pen. But preparing the time to find the sketch and to walk around the site and not just sit there and say, okay, here I am, I'm sketching, but to really absorb that experience, to find the moment where that overwhelming desire to sketch somehow found a kindred reflection in the experience of the place. And to watch that is just amazing, to watch that type of engagement, that type of encounter.
I was in Riva in 2014 and went on we actually spent Thanksgiving in Barcelona. And while we went together, the students and I, to the Barcelona Pavilion one afternoon. And we were there and we'd been there, but hour and a half, 2 hours. Students, they're not antsy. And that was towards the end of the semester, obviously. They'd found their practice. We'd been there a long time. Nobody was wanting to leave and head out or do anything. And a bus came up and disgorged a bunch of Japanese architecture students. And it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. They all ran out into the Barcelona Pavilion, ran around for maybe 5 minutes, took pictures of themselves and maybe the building, and then just ran back in and got into their bus. And it was almost like if I had directed an educational moment for the American students. That would have been it, because all of our kids were I guess at that point, they were just my little kids at that point, but because it's a tighter group with Riva. But it was amazing because they were like, what in the world were they doing? There's no way they're studying architecture. They didn't see a thing. So it was beautiful in its juxtaposition.
Yeah. It's called a drive-by shooting.
Yeah.
Julie and I were on separate programs back years, but we traveled to these and we would with these guys. And that's exactly what they did. And we would get to the city and they would run off the bus and they had their list and they did their photographic sketch, right? And I'm like, you can use your camera, right? And we didn't. I mean, and we did get along with them, but it was just a complete eye-opener.
Well, we always photographed also.
Yeah. But it was a complete eye-opener about how they were approaching and everything that I can remember with me, it was about, art. And we just had this conversation. Architecture is not about a building. Art, that's not what architecture is about. It's about the place and how the people live, and people live in different ways in different environments. And that's really what you're documenting when you're there and you're sketching, you know. So it was really nice to have these two guys there, because it was an in-your-face, really in-your-face moment about, you know, and then having the conversations then with them at the end of the day, after they got done doing their little fun list, right? And then having the conversations about, well, did you notice this? Oh, huh, right? You know, those conversations led to dialogues, which then were enriching from themselves. Yeah.
I was on that trip with you, and they made me seem like a much better faculty.
You've coasted ever since.
Well, I mean, for how many years did we share the bus with Larry Dahl? Remember? Gene's
Because
great
Larry
friend,
Dahl,
Larry.
so he studied here. And he became Larry came out of the Virginia Tech program and then was assistant dean over at UT. And so he brought the program, you know, together. He asked.
We shared the bus, I
Shared-
remember,
yeah.
yeah.
Larry had a different theory of packing because people were talking about how to pack. Students always ask. He had a month worth of underwears.
Well, I
He
think
told me to, if you get a hole in your underwear, it's time to throw it out, Frank.
Yeah.
He had a month of underwear and it was a different mentality, but
You know what
they
they
needed
did?
their money.
I went in 87 in the travel program. It was the last time the Ferraris ran the whole thing from first day to last day. But people would join. So I don't know, Shelley's not in the room anymore, but she got married to Michael that year and she and he joined us on the bus. But Egger was on the bus for Italy. But the Texas kids had projects they were doing at the same time, and they would be in a city and go into their hotel rooms and never see the place because they had a project they had to get done to deliver. And so it was immaterial what was outside the window.
The faculty, I'll try to shut up, but I can't. The faculty, a name from Texas who had a good soul and a good heart. He said, Frank, what's the difference between the Renaissance and Baroque? And I said, well, one's straight and the other's curvy. You know, we were at a different level. It worked out. It worked out. Michael Benedict.
I also loved about the program, you know, especially, and Gene did this, Hans did it, when we would go to Italy, Gene would bring in people, architects from the area, a photographer, you know, chef. Right, because again, it wasn't about a picture, not about a building, he knew that. You know, he brought that to us, and in 2013, I went I met up with the group for a week with him and another alumni. We went together and just to walk around with the students, and he was still doing it. You know, we went to Boda's house, and then we went to an office up there at Milan. And it's just like he just understood and knew how to get people or students excited. And it didn't take much for all of us to grasp what was happening.
I want to make an asterisk. I just making myself older than I am. 89 is when I went on the travel program. So that was the last semester, fall semester
He
when,
was there.
yeah, 89.
I was there in 90.
So sorry, I got here in 87. I went on travel program in 89.
Thanks for that correction.
I'll change my notes.
Well, just in terms of the last time the Ferraris were fully.
Very precise.
Was it all?
I wanted to speak on regards to augments what Mark said earlier. Gene Egger often echoed Ferrari, and I think this is still so very much true. So Gene said, Ferrari said, study abroad is not about seeing Europe. It's not about that. Study abroad is a momentary displacement of a young mind that when displaced, you open yourself up to trying to read what is different. And so he said the important part is actually when you read back, because it opens up your eyes to what's always in front of you, but you could never critically see. And I think Gene very much believed that also, and I think you could see his continuing work that he did also here in Virginia. And say now you can see maybe those lost towns in a different eye, and there's quality things in front of you, but because you're every day becomes somewhat numb to you. And I think this is still true when students come back from their study abroad programs. They have a much more open mind in their own environment. There was That's also great. a faculty development program. Faculty need to recharge. Faculty that do it are able to recharge their batteries, and that's the way it was explained to me. Because faculty get so much out of it, as well as the student.
So it's 2 minutes to lunchtime. Anybody want to add in an observation?
Only
Yeah.
thing is, I don't know how it's done in, pre-COVID going from Reba to visit various, Chino, but I went 81 and 83, lots of other people that went around that time. It's just still unbelievable to me that 25 or 30 students were just sort of unleashed, random in
In the
groups of
cars.
3 or 4 cars.
Oh, yeah.
Drive around and knock
In
on
the
people's
cars.
doors and just, can you show, and in our terrible Italian, they had to say, can you please let us come inside and look at your house.
Yeah. And not only that, there were 4 of us in those little tiny like polos or whatever they were. And you'd be going up those hills and it's like you're 10, 20 kilometers per hour below the speed limit because the engine's not big enough to carry us 4 Americans, like scary. So I guess, Lord, are we ready?
In fact, I started with Burchard, the so-called field projects program, and we tried to avoid the agriculture research world that was already set up to do field work, and we did our own field work. We would consult with high schools and architects and do front-end kind of programming for different projects. But, and also the internship, I started that with Burchard. That was one of Burchard's ideas. And where we now call it externship, that's when we call it then as externship, where you go work for an architect, work in an architect's environment, and get paid actually, and get credit, which was not the model from Cincinnati, where they go work and they don't get credit. That was radical in that sense. So we didn't avoid the practice, but I think we would always make a requirement on the externship that they would allow the student to go to meetings with clients, which was unheard of at the time, and also not necessarily to design something, but to participate in the changes that happen from the beginning of a project to the end. But I think we're in condition formulated at the moment, and so is the country. And some of the good, right now, there's more good architecture out there than ever before in the generation when this school started. I mean, there's more overt accomplishments with his signature stuff and not including the Taubman Museum. I mean, I can argue with that thing all day, but it's a world-class attempt. Some bad details, but live with it. So I think today we're becoming much more public, which in a way is against ambiguity. In fact, I'm not sure we are tolerant with any ambiguity at all at the moment, which I think is fundamental to education. Ambiguity is probably the wrong word, but you can make a false clarity in a predetermined situation, that unless you have the complex questioning mechanism going on with you, it'll be a very superficial kind of resolution in the end product. And for example, I think the solar house is not superficial at all.
I think that one was maybe less overtly connected. Like I said, I hadn't seen any of these, and the students had identified the excerpt that we saw. Just to remind everyone that Ron had said, or somebody had said, that that video in its totality will be made available to you. It's an hour and 40 minutes, so I think I'd probably be able to glean a lot of interesting from watching the whole thing. And then Camden will sign the poster he made, and everybody gets one at the end of this, and as we're moving down into the lobby when we conclude this session. So the room's not my forte, so I'll let those of you who are interested in place and Appalachia and other things have at it.
Hilary.
You go.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know some of you, I don't know others. My name is Kevin Jones, and I'm a professor of practice here in the school. And I teach and make buildings. So this morning I was architecting, this afternoon I'm talking with you all. So I'm here today to facilitate discussion about some of the work that Gene was doing out in the hills and the hollers. And let me start with, so it says 1998. I did my undergraduate here in biochemistry in 1998, and then another degree somewhere else, and then came back and got my MArch degree in 2004. I didn't really know Gene, didn't have him as a professor. When I came back to teach, he was mostly retired. We might have sat in on a review or two, though I was struck yesterday while sketching and working on something during the discussion over at the Alumni Center, that it turns out Gene was my teacher also, right? Because I went and worked with Bert for 10 years in Richmond, 10 plus years, co-conspirators, and continued to do so. And sort of hearing all these stories, it's very clear that I can sort of trace a lineage, my own education as an architect, sort of back through to Gene, Ferrari, and others. So don't have this immediate connection to Gene, but all of a sudden, especially last night, sort of felt a real connection that all of you all have sort of felt. I wanted to start with, I gather some discussions were already being had this morning in the room about the work. I was somewhat aware of Gene's work in coal camps and things in West Virginia and southern West Virginia, Southwest Virginia. Through the book of his sketches and things. And it wasn't until just a week or so ago that, the kind of body of work that came out on the wall presented. So beginning last spring, we started a new outreach-oriented fourth-year design lab, specifically focused on regional engagement and working in place, working with communities, basically getting out. And it grows out of a spirit of travel and the importance of travel to the education of an architect that Gene and others, that's so foundational to our school. And the shorthand version for me is we're study abroad at home. So we're based in Blacksburg, but we travel regionally, go out and work in communities, photograph. And coincidentally, we identified community partners and did work last spring in Pocahontas, Virginia for our first outing, which is this body of work.
It's still, oh my God, it's still projecting.
It's all good. Here.
Pocahontas is the left-hand side.
Yeah, so the Opera House there, Opera House over there. And this, in the spring, I had 13 students. I think there's some you here that they are sort of excellent. We went out and did much of this same kind of work. We traveled, we sketched, we photographed, we stretched tape measures, did all of those good things. We also did design work with the communities, engaged directly with stakeholders,
We slept in a 16-bed motor lodge for ATV people. Called it the Pocahontas campus of Virginia Tech, this sort of hardware store, with 16 bunk beds and a kitchen. The front was a community meeting room, had an ATV hanging from the ceiling, and we met with the locals. Went and sang karaoke at the one bar that's open in town 3 days a week, to sort of engage with folks. So it's a body of work focused on impact and engagement, very much grounded in the sense that we don't have to go very far, find good things to learn from, and to learn to see, so we can study abroad at home. If we do so, it's affordable for those students whose financial or family situation precludes sort of extensive travel. It gives them a chance. You'll see a map over there. We spent 8 days in vans driving through 5 states in Appalachia, visiting architecture firms and projects, and stopping at community centers. We watched a movie about coal in an old rundown building on a snowy night in Huntington, West Virginia. So we're sort of out there really engaging with people in place that way. And I was really struck hanging the work yesterday at just how similar things are. I hadn't seen, other than the sketches in the book, hadn't really seen this body of work that Gene had done. This conversation that's clearly been happening over 40 years of time really sort of stuck with me as I went home last night, as I was hanging maps over there with topography, site conditions, and I was looking at these, right? Like different media, exact same set of concerns and types of investigations. So that's just a little bit to contextualize, sort of the room, this conversation that's happening across time, and struck a little bit by just like the ripples of my own education, sort of Gene and others sort of rippling out, the ripples of his work that show up in the work of the students from last spring, but in the ways that we're also transforming and sort of asking new kinds of questions as we go along. This fall, we're doing another outing, working down in Sewanee, Tennessee. Different set of concerns, different town, different stakeholders. We were focused on coal impacted sort of economies and the rural condition of. This fall, we're specifically engaging with a largely erased minority community at the University of the South in a multi-university with students from VCU as well as the students here at sort of design work. We go down, we meet with the community. They came through Blacksburg, design reviews. Members of the community picked up models like faculty do and said, I like it better when it stands up like this instead of laying down. So same kind of thing. So this sort of doing things with people, not to them. We really show up and ask questions. It's the first time I've seen that video. There were a couple of things Gene said in there that I think really speak to what we're doing. I hung a few of those, those big Post-it sheets, from in the moment that are hanging on a wall of glass or stuck on a drywall wall when you meet with the community. So show up without too much of a sense for the exact nature of the work. And we ask questions and we talk and we listen. And then from there, the students start to synthesize a set of ideas. So Gene was talking about the power of ambiguity. I'm sure my students would nod if I said, hey, has there been ambiguity in the work last fall and this spring? Absolutely. Are they learning to navigate and work with that? Absolutely. Sort of propose things. The work done in Pocahontas. I was down 2 weeks ago, chatted with the mayor. They're doing some work. And first thing they're doing with a little bit of grant money they had was something based on streetscape proposals that the students showed last spring, because they hadn't thought of sort of that before. So again, ripples that go out. The work in Sewanee will be fundraised, and this memorial classroom for this community will be built over the next 12 to 18 months. So
I was wondering, Kevin, just you've contextualized this work. Is there, I was told some people from this work were going to be here. Is there anyone in the room who can contextualize the three?
I was about to ask that.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, trying to keep it on a focus. Is Chuck Boltman here? Can you speak to?
Can you speak?
Well, I mean, was this a class? Was it, did it emanate out of just Gene's interest, because I know he took vans out when they weren't class related. So maybe you could give some context to how this work came to be done.
I can try. But I would like to start by correcting something I said this morning. I said that I had printed many of these boards. I was part of many people who worked on this project. One of them is right here, Melissa, she worked on the project as well. And so basically the way it began, as best as I understand it, is yes, it was Gene's interest to explore these company towns. And then he began to talk about it with some of the upperclassmen at the time who wanted to be involved. And it sort of blossomed, and there was a group of people who would go out to West Virginia once or twice a week. And other people would filter in and out of the group depending on their interests and their time. And it became quite a collective. Almost everyone around at the time knew that it was going on, and you could participate or not. Everyone was encouraged. And I think one of the things that is running through my mind right now is from the quote yesterday, that concept of an iterative process. So to what Kevin's saying, we would literally go to mostly these three towns over and over and over. Because in a way, we were trying to figure out what we were seeing. So the documents that you see on the wall are many iterative processes into it, because in the beginning, the sketches they didn't strike the mark. So, we talked earlier today about, going to a place and sort of owning it a little bit with your sketch and seeing it and touching it. Well, we were trying to do that, but these places were hard and the photographs didn't hit the mark and the sketches didn't quite hit the mark. It really took months of doing this before we started to say, oh yeah, you can take a picture like the one that's paired up there and show that there's this incredible density in this place that you wouldn't expect in rural West Virginia. And so many of the photographs and Liz's sketches, ones with the wash, these sketches, she was the first one to hit this thing in the presence of a mountain. I come from the city. Mountains don't have presence to me. And those are beautiful. And they were the first time the mountains played a role. And that was really striking. So it really was a very collaborative process that included a lot more people than are listed on that
Did the
thing.
typological distillations of like housing cluster organizations and things happen, I imagine, at the very end? Or was it something that you were probing through analog media and then you refined and formalized through these more precise line drawings?
Yeah, you could, it's funny because you could see some of that early on, particularly with Cass, which is the lumber town
It's here.
down there. Obviously, it's very organized in one part, at least the left-hand side, which was the housing side. The right-hand side was the people who ran the place, the doctor's house, the manager's house, and they all took on a different character. But then we started to see it in different kinds of refinement and grades in Pocahontas and in Gary. And it manifests itself differently in different places. But there was always a still similar iconography. What was the company's presence, which is embodied by the photograph on the top there. How do you get the photograph that really shows how the company was always sort of present? Those smokestacks in that town. You could never go anywhere without seeing them. They unfortunately fell down at one point. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
A few of you guys from the fall, can you speak a little bit to the spring? Speak a little bit to what the things you saw when you were out there, like Chuck just did.
Well, I guess one thing that.
Say who you are first.
Forgive me. I'm Brandon Hernandez. I'm now in thesis, but I did this program during the spring, and I've never been to rural Appalachia before. I didn't even know how to. I would always say Appalachian, so I did real hard on that. But when going through it, it was like this. Like, yeah, you hear stories, you hear of things, but now you're experiencing it firsthand. And traveling through some of these towns, you come to realize, like, wow, there is a really big disparity from just going over the ridge and just seeing how a town that was once controlled by a huge mining operations, lumber, whatever it may have been, and just second that leaves, and just the shell of what's left and these people who are trying to hold on because that's home to them, you know, it's, they grow up generations there. So it's just going through multiple different examples that are like maybe a mile or so apart, but are stuck in these hollers where that's, you know, very narrow, which I guess would explain the density. And it's just really seeing like the reality of the situation, but also seeing the beauty of it too, just like of how much money you can, like you could see, like if you found a fossil in a sense and just see how much rich, like how much wealth was in this area. We got to go to Itman, West Virginia, and there's a huge company store that's still standing. That's all stone, and they had like Italian masons and all that. And I was just like, man, this is the middle of nowhere, and it's just the beauty of it, appreciating it. Maybe not like the idea of the company town looking over, you know, like that history of it, but just appreciating like, you know, there's thought that went into designing some of these places, and just, it was really interesting. And that's like, how do you appreciate that? How do you show that when you're trying to help a community out, for instance?
It's funny, when we went with Egger sketching, I was, I think, a freshman, and I think there was a few of us that did, and I think because we were in a studio. So you got in a van on Saturday, you just kind of went and drew. And I was talking to Anne about some stories today that she was reminding me about. You remember Charles eating an onion on the van? But I think for us, like, you engaged with the people there much more than we did. We were there to kind of document and sketch, and the people would come up to you, and I think that's what hit me, was the abject poverty and how beautiful these places had been, right? There were, so maybe it was Pocahontas, maybe there were 20 churches at one time with 20 different religions, and there at one point, Gene was always like, there used to be 40 bars in this place. You know, I think that the amount of people who came from so many disparate places, and what an almost little thriving communities they were, and they aren't anymore. And people would come up and say, and I don't know if they did this to you, like, why are you here? What are you doing?
That's pretty normal, I think.
And but it was interesting to talk that they were so happy, as even if you were sitting there drawing. I mean, you did a lot more engagement, so you probably had much more fruitful discussions with them about, so they were ready to tell you about their place. And I think that's such a value, to give someone that kindness to say, wait, this is actually matters, and help them see things in there, which we were there more just to document, not to give, I would say not to give back like now. But I think that going through those places, and I live in Philly, which is the poorest, you know, most poverty, the large city with the largest poverty. And when I went there, I lived in a pretty marginalized neighborhood. And it was the same thing. People would say, why do you want to live here? And you'd be like, well, this is a really wonderful place, but you'd have to help them understand what was nice about it. I'm glad you guys got to really work with.
Because I guess like along with saying and hearing that is like, I was fortunate where I was able to choose like what, you know, we all had to choose where, like what group we wanted to be a part of. And what struck to me was the opera house for Pocahontas, for instance, and how if you asked anyone in that town, like, oh, you know, what do you appreciate here? Like the opera house, they would point right to it. And no matter where we were in the town, they'd point directly at it. So it was always in the back of their head. So it was just like, it was like just communicating them, hearing the stories. And it's just like all these different things, it really became more personal. And now it's like, we're in this together in a sense. It's like, yeah, we're kind of out of towners in that sense, but like they make us feel comfortable, very generous. And that's like, we're family at this point in that, you know, in the broad scheme, but it's just like, it's just really interesting. And it's really neat.
Those of you guys from 82, Bill's not in the room, is he? So this is like, Heinrich told the stories that someone told Egger told Heinrich. This is, apparently Bill Galloway drove the van on the day that this sketch here was made, here. And he said, Egger always, and that's why maybe you can follow up on this, Egger always wanted to talk to the people who were in the town, and he'd start talking to them. And there was a guy who was standing, I guess, at where the perspectiva lines of the railroad tracks and the building are. who, again, this is filtered through me, and it was Bill who recollected it, that the old man standing there said, well, you know what they used to, I can't do an accent, sorry. You know what they used to call this place was Gossip Corner. And this is where everyone in the city center would gather and where all the action happened, like in terms of the community sharing information. And that it's so, even though, and to me, I don't think of Egger sketches as having people in them. And yet when Bill described that, to me, there were people involved in him filtering how he was going to make the sketch. And so I don't know, do you guys remember him talking to the folks in the town purposely, or would it just happen?
I think he just walked up, and I don't know how it is now, but Cass was pretty advanced, and I think it's changed a lot. I remember walking through and Egger saying, do not step in those ditches because those are open sewers. They don't have plumbing. You know, that kind of thing, you just had no idea. So a lot of them didn't have that many people.
Yeah. They were very sparsely
Populated.
populated at the time.
It hasn't changed.
Well, the big thing about this trip, I mean, I was a graduate student, the 3-year Master of Architecture program, and I had a GTA, and part of it was driving the van for this. I did that maybe 3 or 4 times. So always on a Saturday, usually rainy and cold. But it was, I think the main thing was trying to really understand the towns physically across the 3 different towns. You know, how they were like, how they were simple, unlike, and what the different hierarchies were in each one, and what were the forces. You know, Gene was always about forces. It's like understanding the forces that made things what they were, and trying to understand what those forces were in each of these towns that gave rise to the physicality that we see and perceive in each one of them. What you experience when you enter the town, as you come into it. You know, this whole sort of succession of experiences as you go through the town, which is, I think, what is a lot of what's captured really well in the boards that are really meant to partly analysis and partly documentation of all those things.
Because they were 3 very different towns.
Yeah. 2 pole, 1 timber. So they were all different, but still driven by the sometimes economic, but also the cultural forces.
Yeah, I think the spirit of some of the things we're thinking about now is related. The idea that we might, across semesters, build a body of work related to built environment and other concerns in Appalachia, you know, that is broad and diverse in scale and in type and in concern, you know, so that stepping back from that work, not unlike putting it all up on the wall in here and sort of saying, oh, wow, I didn't quite realize that those things were in conversation. But that by working in a different place each semester, but engaging for a full semester and spending the night and getting to know people and shopping and eating and drawing and doing all those things, that we might start to understand a region. You know, we're still a little bit close. Appalachia, if you or don't know, it's 13 states and it starts almost down in Louisiana and it goes to New York, depending on your definition. It tends to get maybe oversimplified to mean West Virginia or coal miners, usually talking about white coal miners, even though that wasn't always the case, right? You know, it gets othered and sort of described in ways that we're very much looking to challenge and sort of by just showing up and looking around and discovering kind of, you know, the cemetery in Pocahontas has sort of names, last names that tell a story of immigration 120 years ago. Right. We were there the night we did our design presentations. It was the same night that they celebrate annually with luminary, candles with bags in the cemetery to memorialize the loss of 100 and something miners 100 and something years ago. And we just happened, it was like the night we scheduled our design presentations. We did a design presentation and we went up at 10 o'clock at night in the dark, you know, as 100 and something luminaries, you know, so it's these experiences of traveling and sort of being, you know, unique to that place in that situation, having that, I heard this word encounter a lot yesterday. It's like having that encounter, I think would be valuable.
I'm interested to ask the students because this is a pedagogy or learning from the language of pattern that has evolved into the learning of the language of pattern and people now that you are continuing to sort of evolve this engagement. Can you talk more about what that's like? I think how do those things come together? What you as a young aspiring architect bring to a conversation with someone. Space. There was is that one you said?
Actually, the beginnings of community outreach goes back to the beginning of this college.
Yeah.
In 1971, 72 timeframe. I'm sorry, my memory fades me, but a house was bought in downtown Portsmouth for $5. In successive waves of us students, we had to volunteer 1 weekend for each group. And the idea was that this was the worst part of Portsmouth in terms of crime, drugs, alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. And we were to rehab this $5 house to create a child homeless daycare center. So at the end, it was moved in. We had a private lactation area. We had a community play area. So it was locked off, safe for the homeless women and
Responsibility of the
children.
students to create
And the
this?
students were sent down. Yeah, I don't know if this was put on by the city of Portsmouth or if the university had bought this house, but it was purchased and developed, and all the material and time were volunteered and donated to create this safe space for them. So this Appalachian work is just a continuation
Idea, that's
of
great.
that beginning.
Find out more about that.
One thing that comes to mind, I think, is in terms of a pattern.
Say who you are, Cash.
I'm sorry, I'm Cash. I'm also a fifth year student in the program last semester. And one of the patterns was this kind of loss connected not just to the loss of people, but due to the lack of people, the loss of the architecture that was there. And that kind of emptying out, but not just the emptying out, but losing those artifacts of the things that remind them of their ancestors or of their families. And so that was why the icon of the Opera House was so important, but also the other things. And it became, I think, interesting to think about how we as architects, through the tools that we work with, can play a role in preserving the remaining pieces that happen to exist in these places. And a lot of times with our work, it was what can we argue can be a function for the space that can justify it being maintained in a manner that would allow it to continue to exist. So that was interesting, kind of working through that from the side of also what do the people are moving away because they lack these certain things, and also these things exist that they're losing and they need a function, kind of bridging those pieces together from a kind of a program side of things. But also the way that through program, we can actually preserve memory and preserve kind of dignity in a way as well. There's this kind of connection between the physical presence of these things and the dignity of their ancestors who were coal miners or other people in the town. So that was interesting to me.
Yes, to elaborate a little further on that, I'm Andrew, and I was also at Catch's studio last semester, and I was part of the group for housing. And when we were walking around, we had encounters with people of the town, and they would show us images. I remember there was one image that really stuck with me. It was an image probably from the 50s where there's this really great parade going down the main street, and the entire town had these very nice medium density, medium rise buildings, and they lined the street and they created this really iconic image of what the town was. There was waxed cars, there were people parading, everyone was very happy. And now those buildings, there was this really, really beautiful ironwork facade that was only taken down I don't know, maybe a decade ago, less than that. And those images of the town have started to fade away. And I guess part of what we came there to do was to try to restore some of that. You know, they loved the image. They remembered this was a very dense town. There was people around. There was a communication between, you know, building and the street. And some of that has been lost over the years. And I guess we all felt that we wanted to help restore that.
Yeah, I don't know. It was funny. I was talking to somebody about how they were gonna display our work and stuff. Oh, I'm Savannah, by the way. Savannah, I was also in their studio. And talking about like Appalachia then versus now, and they made like kind of a joke, like, oh, like I don't know how different Pocahontas could be from 40 years ago. And it's pretty different. A lot of buildings have fallen even within like the last decade. And earlier you were talking about sort of like understanding forces and stuff. I felt like we were also trying to understand the forces, not necessarily that may have already changed the town, but will change the town. And so I felt like we took a lot of time to like identify either through the people or through our travels what those forces could be, whether it be like community gardening or like revitalizing a streetscape or just creating like a housing development that can foster community and bring new people in. So that's what I found pretty interesting, was identifying those things and seeing how we could apply them to Pocahontas.
I think as architects, we collect, like when we travel, we're collectors, right? We collect with our cameras and our sketchbooks and our memory kinds of things. You know, I think as we were driving around and, you know, in the vans and things, we were attempting to collect. I like this forces. It's a nice, you know, so we purposely visited and talked to architects doing this work, revitalization groups, went to restaurants that have been put into a place that have been sort of turned around in Lexington, Kentucky, you know, trying to collect those things to then bring back to the community. You know, like, hey, we were out and we saw this, you know, listening and hearing about the need for improved health outcomes and entrepreneurship and tourism. You know, so we went out seeking, but we're primed a little bit by our relationships that we'd already developed with stakeholders and partners, town, to go out and collect things in that way. As we do as architects, we're sort of always, I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna keep it for the next project, right? We do that all the time. And that's something I learned here. I'm sure you all did as well. So yeah, this kind of bringing things back out. And I think what's been interesting, I was thinking a little bit about today and this work and that work and the dialogue between them, but also the differences in that, you know, when we design or when we, you know, to observe, to document, to analyze, but then to design, to propose, you know, that you get to that level of synthesis that's possible, where documentation informs sort of decision-making and empowers the student at their desk to start to bring those variables together. You know, to somehow drive the picture of Andrew and Brandon on the tape measure on the side of the Opera House in the old fire station, which is this building. It's currently got no roof, it's just open. Which of you had the dumb end and which had the smart end of the tape measure? I don't remember.
Which is the dumb end?
The
Which is the
picture's right
smart
there. Yeah. Do you know the difference right there? The dumb end is the person who just holds it and the smart end has to read the number. So there they are. Yeah, they're sort of measuring it over there. And then take that information to then draw and document that building, but then to propose, to develop sort of designs that respond in really specific ways. Seems like
I think that's a critical
different.
differentiation between the work, which is, it is very different to design than it is to document. And I think just, I mean, I don't know that much about the company town work because I never participated in it, but in trying to figure out what the work was and what the numbers were, what I was putting up on the wall, I started seeing a connection to something I believe was a deep interest of Egger's. And so in some level, I think while this may be student work, I think it's Egger's filter, which is that of the idea of settlement. And I think he was very interested in whether it was a settlement in southwestern Virginia or West Virginia, or a settlement Rome, or any city in Europe that you might travel to with him. When his office was right next to where my studio was for my first 10 years here on the first floor. And when we were moving, I mean, it was a wreck in there. It was like pile upon pile upon, I mean, oh my God, there was so much stuff, slides and carousels and boxes.
That
of-
way Edgar and I are similar then.
Like, it was, I honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if we went in there one day and it just collapsed all over him and like, we would hear, oh, you know, we'd have to go save him. But we helped him move things out when he was moving out. And the books, the number of books that almost all were about cities or an urbanist's take on a place, or so I think this was a deep overriding architectural interest of Egger's that for me, even though this may be these company towns, I actually think the company towns are superseded by an overriding interest in the urban condition.
Yeah, and I think also you have to appreciate, I think Egger always had a multiplicity to what he was doing. So for the first year students who went out here, it was as much understanding the architectural forces that impact things. You could go to these places, there was a nature of place. Was it formed by space, by material, by the geography? That's as much as what the first year students need to know, how to start to see those things in an environment. You come to fourth and fifth year, at some point you guys are more adept at understanding those and working with them, and then you layer on program, you layer on history, you layer on all the things that people bring to those architectural elements. And it just adds a complexity to it. And I think Egger knew that. When he went out there, he had that notion or interest in place, but it was like for the first year students, let's let them start to see those physical forces that architects deal with. Let's put them in a van with an upper year or a graduate student for 2 hours. Let's get them out of the building. For upper year students, it's different. Let's show them the complexity of a crowd full of people going, I remember this, and you're going, how do I memorialize this? And knowing that value comes from youth, like one of you guys said, if you don't find a use for it, it will lose its value and it loses its memory. I think he was always thinking about that and from coming at it from different directions.
One of the things that I find ties this work together with a lot of the work downstairs when I think about it, because it's trying to sort of get away from the techniques and the, just visually how interesting or how informative you think they are, particularly when you look at the company town studies. And the reason maybe there aren't any people, it's sort of starting to tie itself together is because it feels like the entry point is often public space. And I mean, public space isn't all that defines a place, but it's often how a place is understood, how a city or town is understood. It's always part of the origination of a place, the settlement of a place. The public space is important. Certain things happen in the public space. When you get to a town and you're on the street and you start talking to locals, you're in public space. And so you are interacting with them in their public space. And that's when I look at these sketches and I look at the sketches downstairs, it feels like, Egger is looking for those places to enter the public space, because it's also where culture, the local culture, is intersecting with all the functional things that have to go on, and all these forces sort of come together in those spaces. And so, yeah, these feel like they mesh really well with the work downstairs that was done in Europe.
Funny thing is, the public space of a company town or the public space of a non-company town is the marketplace. The public space of a company town is the company store. They didn't have a marketplace because the company wanted to control that, with the more or less exception of Pocahontas, because it was a little bit more like a standalone city. So that Cass and Gary, they're public, the public spaces in Gary absolutely were the churches. They dot the edges of the town. And the one sketch was discussed before about white miners. The sketch behind Donna's head is really critical because it is looking through the very prominent white church to the less prominent, but still there, black church. Why did we know that? Because Gene was talking to the people who lived there while we were all out sketching.
That brings to mind something. Gene Egger, the man, the myth, the legend. Gene had a way of being able to relate to all kinds of people. Right. The people, yeah, like me, he could relate to, and the people in the company town, and then all the myriad of students that he's come in contact with. I call him the great common denominator. He had plugs all over him that if you were a four-pronger, you could plug into Gene and relate to him. He was so common of a denominator, if you were a three, he could relate to the three, etc. So he was just a common denominator at all levels. But now I progress after hearing all this. He's progressed in my mind to a pollinator. He became a pollinator. He'd either be carrying something on his legs to the next guy or making a contact between this guy and this guy that was a significant thing, and finding a commonality in all of us. The pollinator, Danae.
Well, did we add that to that list? So now what are we?
Yeah, he's a great pollinator. Don't take that wrong.
Pollinator
But the
Gene.
intersection. How he could.
A busy bee, huh?
Yeah, he's a busy bee, whether he was a hummingbird or just a human that could connect and inspire.
Fred, to amplify on that, I came here to teach first in 1992 and went with him and some students to Shawsville. So 10 years later, he's still going out there. It wasn't a company town, but it was a town in Appalachia. And Kirsten Sparrenberg was one of those students that he pollinated because she went on to write a book called Lost Communities. And with the Assistance Community Design Assistance Center.
She also draws like a dream.
And she
draws like a dream.
She draws like a dream, and the co-author was Terry Fisher.
He
So
could sting like a bee.
so Lost Communities, if you're interested to see the impact these studies had on one particular student.
Well, and Terry Fisher was the first visitor we had in our seminar last spring. She came and talked about that body of work and, you know, sort of, yeah, again, this network is the thing, right? That stitches it all together.
Can I ask your students a question?
Yeah.
So you guys are you all fifth year?
Yeah. We're
So,
Well, there's two groups here. So one group that did it in the spring that are now fifth years.
okay.
And the quiet group before to the right are currently in their fourth year. We're doing this work now.
So, I mean, I think as you graduate, and if this is an interest to you, there's probably a lot more opportunity to find things to do in that way than there was when I graduated for school. But how does anything you saw or did impact what you think you will do?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I think I found a new love, like a new love and appreciation for the things of old. And I say that in a way of like, say, like the architecture, the built environment, and kind of how things were structured concerning like why this building had to be here and it couldn't be over there. And just realizing that, you know, as time passed and like, for instance, for these like towns that we got to experience with the industry moving out, now they're kind of left empty. is like, how can you reimagine a place? Like, how can you create a place? How could you bring people back? How can you turn apathy to empathy and a lot of other different things? And at least for me, like I started like since I'm also starting to look for jobs now in that sense, it's like looking through people like firms' portfolios and seeing like, you know, what kind of work do they do, and seeing like, oh, they do a lot of, say like, I mean, the term adaptive reuse, for instance, where it's like something that's old, that's there, but it still has good meat on it. And, or good bones, I should say, and then I gotta put the meat on it, and it's like all these different things. It's like, at least for me, that's kind of an appreciation I started to grow. And it kind of came from this program, in all honesty, because it's just like I had an appreciation for historical things like a little bit beforehand. Then really going out, seeing it and having a project to where that's like my main focus. It was really interesting, and now it's inspiring me, also inspiring my thesis work right now.
For me, I think like the major thing that I'm gonna take away is that there can be like just as much work done like in a community meeting as at the drawing board. And so like when we would have these meetings with the community, hearing about stories or like concerns they had, they inspired the work so much. I was also on the housing group, and we had to navigate like a pretty steep topography. It was kind of difficult to figure out, but they were telling stories about the importance of these stairs that went up to the old high school, and how they all had memories of like climbing up these stairs and everything. And so
These stairs in the sketch right here.
yeah.
40 years later.
Maybe a photo of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and yeah, and so like the stairs ended up in the housing work too, to kind of connect these two sort of levels that we made. But we wouldn't have made it there without like talking to the community and stuff. And so that's what I find really important. I don't know, I was kind of shy in the beginning, so I really had to like get over myself and just learn how to talk to people and everything. So yeah.
I want to ask a question of the practitioners in the room, because I am just super impressed just in the articulation of your experience. One thing we say when we interview people, go back and say, can they talk to humans? Yeah, you know, right? And I think just
Human beings?
the double sort of syllable ones. But to the practitioners in the room in this approach to education, where they're now or second, third, fourth years that are now doing work in community, does that resonate with you when you see people come out of school?
Absolutely.
Yes, because if you do any kind of public entitlement work, it's the same process. In other words, you're gonna bring a concept, and jurisdiction staff is gonna review it and comment. Then it's gonna go to the neighborhood groups that are gonna have all kinds of comments. And you're gonna be constantly rethinking, revising, hopefully improving. And you have to make the case for your concepts. They're not architects.
There are a couple kinds of planning projects you might find yourself working on, maybe 2, 3. You know, there's municipal work that happens. Every town, city, place is always planning. They're always doing some form of analysis. Often, you know, it's more starting on the engineering side, maybe it's infrastructure. Then you've got developers. You've got developers who are, you know, on the private side, developing sometimes, you know, the town center was all the rage for a while, but I mean, it sort of varies in terms of where the money is, in terms of scale and the types of programs and buildings. But, you know, eventually I found there's this other side too, and which is a little bit harder to find. And sometimes it's sort of on the nonprofit side, but it's really focused on community development, you know, planning that is community driven, that is driven by the people there. And I've been fortunate for about 20 years now to work with a program that the AIA has had in place since I think 1967, the Design Assistance Team program. And when we go into communities, ironically, we just finished a downtown plan for Mont Eagle, which is right next to Swanee. And so
We stay at the Quality Inn in
it's
Mont Eagle.
Quality Inn in Mont Eagle.
That's our one of our
So-
design lab
That's
locations.
next to the Burger King.
Yeah, it's
McDonald's, actually,
McDonald's.
but
And when we put a team together, usually it's a team from around the country, different, we go do a pre-visit, we go there and we kind of decide what kind of specialist do we need. Sometimes we need a brownfield specialist because there's a big contaminated site right in downtown. And, but usually it's landscape architects, real estate people, we put this team together and we don't tour. If I'm a team leader, I go there first to meet with people and get kind of a feel for things. But then when we bring the team, the first thing they do is set up a series of a community meeting. They're like meetings with stakeholders in the community during the day and then a big community meeting that evening. And they don't tour the town until after all of that meeting happens. And it's important because, you get there and you're just inclined to see the place through your own eyes and your own perceptions, and you're bringing all your ideas with you. And that first day of just listening and kind of writing some things down, hearing what people feel is important, lets you then go into the community and start to see some things through their eyes. It's not direct, but we've found it's essential to the process if we can stay working with these people through, call it a design. Sometimes it's just to help with organization. It varies. A lot of different communities want different things. And we really usually in that situation want the plan to be their plan when we're done, not to be our plan. And so just to let you know, there are different philosophies about how to approach planning and communities out there. And if it interests you, then it's worth really kind of looking around and sort of trying to see the differences and think about where, which process might fit you best in terms of how you feel about the way these communities develop and what you'd like to see happen and how you'd like to play a role. I moved over many years from doing a lot of work with developers and things to really being more on that side of things where I'm spending a lot more time, just like I'm sure Bert knows, like in meetings, listening to people and, really helping be a facilitator because sometimes that's the best way that I can bring my skills into a community and not try to sort of tell them what I think they should do.
Yeah, she said it best. The work that happens in the meeting is really the exciting piece. And I think just the legacy of this work evolving into the action of this work, evolving into the way that you learn and see, disseminate and listen, is also the tool that you'll use when you are in a position, maybe like you are in Sewanee, where you're having to create solely from memory. Solely from someone's interpretation of pattern. So kudos to you.
Is there a future body of work? And can you share a little bit on what your thoughts are for that future? Is it just a go forth to the community, engage, retreat back and historically document, go forth to another community, historically document, retreat, or is it really trying to save a community? Save a life, like,
Good question. Attempt an answer.
Well, he's the big pollinator, so it ought to save the place.
Dance a little. No. So, last spring we were bootstrap or scrappy, sort of get out there and do the work. I think I worked with the Community Design Assistance Center, started with this community work, sort of with Bert and Richmond and Camden at the MOP studio. And, out of a belief that architecture can dignify people and places, so the communities we're working with, the idea is that it does help support change that is in progress, and that we come in at the right time and provide an infusion of energy and resources, design resources. 13 students last spring, working however many hours per week over 15 weeks, multiply that times, I don't know, $100 an hour. and you're talking about $100,000 worth of design work going into a community. So it has real value. You know, talking to the mayor a few weeks ago, you know, that the ideas start to percolate. The work in Swanee, it's coming in year 6 or 7 of a multi-year process that plugs in, and that will continue. The community we've identified for spring of 26 down in Pound, Virginia, which is about 3 hours away. It's almost Kentucky, about 5 minutes from Kentucky.
How about residency program?
The residency is the tricky part, but the idea is to sort of plug in, and that this work supports, the visuals provide ways that groups can grab a piece of it, put it into a funding application for tobacco indemnification money, or pursue a CDBG grant, or pursue those things that make it tangible. What's not shown on the wall here from the spring is that we took all the projects and we organized it so that if you were interested in health outcomes, you knew where to look. If you're interested in entrepreneurship, you knew where to look, so that community stakeholders and partners can take this work. So I don't think any of us want it to sit on a shelf. We recognize that the change is incremental.
It's like CDC, build a resource base.
Yeah, so we're sort of.
Do you know that Miles Austin School has about a $500,000 grant for
Take it.
workforce development and build around modular housing in Appalachia? There's about, what I gather, there's a lot of bucks to come for that. I think I actually personally think from what I've seen and what I've heard, that there's a real opportunity to merge that, to transform. Community transformation is.
Agreed.
It's a difficult thing to do. I mean,
Yeah, and we've been talking, Appalachian Futures would be great if Economic Development Group from Pamplin were involved, and the team from the Landscape Architecture Department were involved, and the guys over at Tourism were involved, so that we could show up and provide the sort of visualizations and the hierarchy, but then it's also packaged with, you know, these other kinds of things. So we aspire to that, and if you have money you want to throw my way.
I don't have any money. You know, the whole industrial design group, along with the architecture group, and, you know, built around housing products, housing renovation, housing restoration, commercial building restoration, renovation, product development, a whole gamut of cradle to grave kind of things in a community. It's almost in the grave.
We're just looking for you to be the great pollinator.
There you go.
Someone's got to take
Residency.
over.
Someone's got to do it. So
Put you up in the hive and start
Back
pollinating.
paint, West Virginia.
You can do it.
Some closing thoughts?
yeah, maybe I just want to give the current team, you're sort of hip deep in this work, right? We had a big deadline Monday presented to the community. Maybe you could just share a thought or two about your experiences. It's a different context and a different set of questions, as Bert said, between sort of working with extant existing conditions and trying to respond versus, you know, working with sort of what's been more seriously sort of lost and erased. Maybe if you guys just have a thought or two to close us out.
Yeah, I guess I can speak. I'm Russell. I'm currently in Kevin's studio. We're working in Swanee, Tennessee for a African-American community located on Swanee's campus. They all have worked, or their parents have worked for the campus for a number of years, and now it's kind of a dwindling community. And our site has what we used to have, these 3 important places that Kevin kind of talks about, as it used to be a school, a church, and a social club. So you could go to school on Friday, go to the club on Saturday, and then go to church on Sunday, all in this one place. So it was kind of like what you were speaking about, of this community, this local Black community had this one area that they would all come to. It was the community spot. But all of those buildings have been torn down. If you go to the site right now, couldn't even place where they really were. They've done some geolocating on the site, but it's still kind of iffy of where these exactly were. So it's our job to build them a memorial to respond to what this place, what this site was culturally for them, and how we can build it so it becomes another community hub. And that's been our task for the whole thing. It's been very interesting because we've gotten to talk to the community a bunch of times and eat with them and share stories with them. And we get to learn a lot about this place that no longer exists, but what it meant to them, even when it's not there, and like how we can respond to it, even when it's not there.
Very nice.
I think ask the students, why do you pick this lab? And, you know, or when I teach professional practice, like, what do you want, what kind of architecture you want to do? What gets you excited? Almost to a one, they say, community work. I say, awesome, what does that mean? And they say, we don't know. You know, but this is a way to start to know kind of what that might mean. And I would say that, you know, the ethos of student-directed learning that's been a part of this school for decades, you know, is this, the continuing work in Appalachia and these projects, direct engagement is very much a chance for a group of students, a generation of students that are really interested in impact and not waiting 20 years for their work to sort of have that impact, that they get to get out and kind of do it. You know, so it's just a way that community, right? Here's a version, like Terry was saying, like, here's one way to start to think about it, to start to try these things out. I've done similar, not this robust, but these kinds of community engagement activities in different ways. I get an email once a year, you know, from students, you know, saying, hey, that thing we did, I just realized why, thank you, why it was sort of a value of, you know, I didn't realize when we were working with that group in Roanoke, but I went to the community meeting after a shooting in Pittsburgh 5 years ago, where we're going to be working with that community, and appreciated sort of this chance to kind of get out and do real things with real people and to bring their sort of superpowers as architects to bear. So, yeah, thank you guys for being here, and thanks for all the ripples sort of from Gene and others. You know, it's all the rocks and all the ripples sort of run into one another, and appreciate. I might see a few of you guys tonight at the college event, so you'll hear a little bit more about some of these things. So thank you all for taking the time to come. I believe the next thing is posters and downstairs.